Quick note here, folks. I self-narrate all my own stories. If that's your thing, subscribing helps keep them coming as a lot of time and effort goes into each video. Thank you for your support. I hope you enjoy. I took a job watching a billionaire's mountain estate for 6 months of isolation and $20,000. The previous caretaker left a note in the freezer. It's not the cold that'll kill you, it's what the cold keeps fresh. I found it 3 weeks into my stay, tucked behind a bag of frozen peas, written on the back of a grocery receipt in shaky handwriting. By then, I'd already started noticing things. Let me back up. My name's Tyler Grant, and up until October of 2023, I was working 60-hour weeks at a software startup in Seattle that burned through funding and laid off half the company. I had about $4,000 in savings, a lease ending in 30 days, and a degree in computer science that wasn't doing me much good. When I saw the listing on a remote work board for a winter caretaker position in the North Cascades, it felt like someone had thrown me a rope. The job description was simple: watch over a 12,000 square foot mountain estate from November 1st through April 30th. Responsibilities included maintaining the driveway, monitoring the security system, keeping pipes from freezing, and making sure the property stayed secure during the owner's absence. Room and board provided. $20,000 paid at completion, plus a $5,000 bonus if everything went smoothly. The listing noted that cell service was non-existent, but the property had satellite internet and a landline for emergencies. Supplies would be delivered monthly to a drop point 3 miles down the mountain. The owner valued privacy and wouldn't be visiting during my tenure. Perfect solitude for someone who needed to disappear for a while and save some money. I applied on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had a phone interview with a woman named Miss Chen who worked for the property management company. She asked standard questions about my background, whether I had experience with generators and basic home maintenance, if I was comfortable with isolation. I told her I grew up in Montana, knew my way around tools, and honestly preferred being alone. The previous caretaker left abruptly, she said near the end of the call, her tone carefully neutral. He cited personal reasons. We need someone who can commit to the full term. I can commit, I said. I've got nowhere else to be. There was a pause on her end. The winters up there are severe, Mr. Grant. You'll be snowed in for weeks at a time. Some people find it challenging. I'm looking forward to it, I said, and I meant it. The idea of 6 months with nothing to do but read, hike when weather permitted, and not worry about rent or interviews sounded like exactly what I needed. She hired me on the spot. The property was about 90 miles northeast of Bellingham, accessible by a private road that branched off a barely maintained Forest Service route. Miss Chen arranged for me to meet the outgoing caretaker, a guy named Daniel, on October 31st for a handoff. He'd show me the systems, walk me through the routine, and then he'd be gone. I loaded everything I owned into my 2006 Honda Civic and made the drive on a gray, cold morning. The property was even more remote than I had expected. The last 20 miles took me through old-growth forest so dense that the road felt like a tunnel. When I finally reached the gate, an iron thing set into stone pillars with a camera mounted above it. I had to punch in a code Miss Chen had texted me. The gate rolled open with a metallic groan. The driveway was another 2 miles, climbing steadily through pine and fir, and then the trees opened up, and I saw the house. It wasn't a cabin, it was a monument. 3 stories of dark timber and glass, perched on a ridge with views that stretched for miles across snow-dusted peaks. The architecture was modern but somehow fit the landscape, all clean lines and massive windows. A stone chimney rose from the center. Solar panels lined the roof. The whole thing looked like something out of an architecture magazine. Daniel's truck was parked near the front entrance, a white Ford with Washington plates. I pulled up next to it and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, staring up at the house and feeling the weight of the silence. No wind, no birds, just the faint tick of my cooling engine. The front door opened, and Daniel stepped out. He was maybe 40, thin, with a patchy beard and deep circles under his eyes. He wore a heavy coat, but it hung loose on him, like he'd lost weight recently. When he saw me, he didn't wave or smile. He just nodded once and waited on the porch. "Tyler?" he called as I climbed out. "Yeah." "Daniel?" "That's me." His voice was flat. "Come on, I'll show you around." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, hardwood floors that gleamed. The main level had an open-concept living area with a kitchen that could have serviced a restaurant, a dining table that seated 12, and a sitting area arranged around a fireplace you could walk into. The furniture was all expensive-looking, leather and wood and metal, but it had a cold feeling to it, like a showroom. "Owner's name is Victor Hale," Daniel said as he led me through. "Made his money in tech. Bought this place 5 years ago. Comes up here maybe twice a year. Never in winter. You won't see him." "Miss Chin mentioned that," I said. "Good." He walked me through the main level, pointing out the security panel, the breaker box, the thermostat controls. His delivery was mechanical, like he was reciting from a script he'd memorized. "Propane heat, 2 500-gallon tanks outside. Should last you the whole winter if you're not wasteful. Generator kicks in if the solar can't keep up. There's a manual for it in the office." We moved to the second floor. Guest bedrooms, bathrooms, a library with built-in shelves, and a rolling ladder. Everything was immaculate, untouched, like no one had ever actually lived here. "You'll stay in the caretaker's quarters," Daniel said, leading me to a door at the end of the hall. "It's separate, more privacy." He opened the door to reveal a staircase leading up. We climbed to the third floor, a converted attic space that had been finished as a studio apartment. Bedroom, bathroom, small kitchenette, sitting area. The ceiling sloped, but it was cozy. A dormer window looked out over the valley. "This is nice," I said. Daniel didn't respond. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets, staring at the floor. "So," I said after a moment, "what's the day-to-day like?" He blinked, like I had pulled him out of some thought. "Right. You'll check the perimeter once a day. Make sure no trees have fallen on the fence, no damage from animals. Clear the driveway after snow. It's got a plow attachment in the shed. I'll show you. Monitor the security cameras. There's 12 of them covering the property. Most of your time you'll just be here." "Sounds manageable." "Yeah," he rubbed his face. "It is. It's easy. It's just," he trailed off. "Just what?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his expression made my stomach tighten. "You ever spend a winter alone? I mean really alone? No neighbors for miles, no way out when the snow comes?" "I grew up pretty rural," I said. "I'm used to quiet." "This isn't quiet," he said. "This is something else." I waited for him to elaborate, but he just shook his head and started back down the stairs. I followed, unease prickling at the back of my neck. He showed me the shed next, a large structure behind the main house that held the riding mower, with the plow attachment, snowshoes, an ATV, chainsaws, tools, and enough equipment to handle just about any maintenance issue. Everything was organized, labeled, clearly well maintained. "Fuel's in the drums over there," Daniel said, pointing. "You've got enough to last. Don't waste it." "Got it." We walked the property line next, following a trail that looped through the trees. The estate sat on 80 acres, most of it forested. The fence was more decorative than functional, wrought iron posts connected by thick cables, but Daniel said it was enough to keep elk and deer from getting too close to the house. As we walked, I tried to make conversation. Asked him where he was from, what he was doing next. He gave short answers. barely looking at me. His nervousness was contagious. By the time we circled back to the house, I was starting to regret taking the job. "Anything else I should know?" I asked, as we stood by his truck. He opened the driver's door, then paused. "The cameras," he said. "Check them every night before bed. All 12 feeds. Make sure they're working." "Okay. And if you see something on them, something that doesn't make sense, don't go outside to check. Just note it in the log and wait until morning." I frowned. "What kind of thing?" "Doesn't matter." He climbed into the truck. "Just don't go out at night. That's the only real rule." "Why?" He started the engine. "Because it's easier to get lost in the dark than you think." And then he was gone, driving down the long driveway without looking back, leaving me standing in front of a house the size of a hotel with nothing but questions and a growing sense that I'd just made a terrible mistake. The first week was fine. Better than fine, actually. I settled into a routine. Woke up around 7, made coffee, did a perimeter check. The weather was cold but clear, and the views were stunning. I'd spend the afternoons exploring the property, reading in the library, cooking elaborate meals just because I could. The silence was heavy, sure, but it wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. I checked the security feeds every night like Daniel had said. 12 cameras positioned around the property. Driveway, front entrance, back deck, shed, perimeter points. Most of the time, they showed nothing but trees and darkness. Once I saw a deer wander past. Another time, an owl perched on the fence. The satellite internet worked fine, though it was slow. I streamed movies, caught up on shows, messaged a few friends to let them know I'd be off-grid for a while. Nobody seemed surprised. I had always been the hermit type. On the 8th day, the first snow came. I woke to find the world outside transformed, everything blanketed in white. It was beautiful. I spent the morning plowing the driveway, getting used to the controls on the mower. The plow attachment worked perfectly, clearing a clean path all the way to the gate. That night, I checked the cameras before bed like always. 11 feeds showed exactly what I expected. Darkness, snow, the faint outlines of trees. The 12th feed, the one aimed at the back deck, showed a figure standing at the railing. I stared at the monitor, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, facing away from the camera toward the valley. They stood perfectly still, hands at their sides. My first thought was that someone had gotten onto the property. A hiker, maybe, or a trespasser, but that didn't make sense. The gate was locked. The nearest trail was miles away. And who the hell would be out in the middle of the night in a snowstorm? I switched to the other cameras, checking the perimeter feeds. Nothing. No footprints leading to the deck. No vehicle in the driveway. Just the one figure, standing alone. I watched for 5 minutes. They didn't move, didn't shift their weight or look around, just stood there, still as a statue. Daniel's warning echoed in my head. If you see something on them, something that doesn't make sense, don't go outside to check. I reached for the landline mounted on the wall, thinking I'd call the property management company, maybe the sheriff. But what would I say? There's someone standing on the deck, but I'm too scared to check. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. I cycled through all 12 feeds again, my pulse hammering. Nothing. No one on the deck, no one anywhere else on the property. It was like they'd vanished. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind against the windows made me jolt upright. When morning finally came, I pulled on my boots and coat and went outside to check the back deck. No footprints in the snow. The surface was smooth, undisturbed except for a light dusting that had fallen overnight. Whoever I'd seen, either they'd been there before the snow, or they'd never been there at all. I told myself it was a glitch, a shadow, maybe, or a trick of the camera's night vision. I checked the system logs, but they didn't show anything unusual. No alerts, no motion detection triggers. Over the next few days, I tried to put it out of my mind. I focused on work, chopped firewood, organized the shed, read 3 novels. The weather stayed cold, more snow falling every other day, and the driveway became a daily chore to clear. But every night, when I checked the cameras, I felt a tightness in my chest, waiting to see if the figure would return. It did, 3 times in the next 2 weeks, always on the same camera, always standing in the same spot on the back deck, facing away, never moving. And every time when I checked in the morning, there were no footprints. I started taking screenshots documenting what I saw. The timestamps showed the figure appearing between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always for less than 10 minutes. In the screenshots, they looked solid, real, definitely human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too still, too perfect in their posture. On November 23rd, I called Miss Chen. "Is everything all right, Mr. Grant?" she asked when she picked up. Her voice was professional, clipped. "Yeah, mostly. I've been seeing something on the security cameras. Someone standing on the back deck. Have there been any reports of trespassers in the area?" There was a pause. "What exactly did you see?" I described the figure, the timestamps, the lack of footprints. As I talked, I could hear her typing on the other end. "The previous caretaker reported similar sightings," she said finally. "We had a security company come out to inspect the cameras. They found no evidence of tampering or malfunction. So, what is it? Most likely wildlife creating shadows or reflections. The cameras have high sensitivity. Sometimes they pick up things that aren't there. This looks like a person. Mr. Grant." Her tone sharpened slightly. "You're experiencing isolation fatigue. It's common in your position. The mind plays tricks. I assure you, if there were any actual security concerns, we would address them immediately." I wanted to argue, but something in her voice told me it wouldn't matter. "Okay," I said. "Thanks. If you're having difficulty with the isolation, we can discuss terminating your contract early, though you wouldn't receive the completion bonus. $20,000. 5,000 bonus." "No," I said. "I'm fine." "Good. Your first supply drop is scheduled for December 1st. The coordinates are in the file I sent you. Anything else?" "No, that's it." She hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the phone, feeling dismissed and faintly ridiculous. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. That night, the figure appeared again. This time, I watched it for 20 minutes straight. It didn't move, didn't sway in the wind, didn't do anything human. When it finally vanished, I realized I'd been holding my breath. The next morning, I went into the main house to make coffee, and on impulse, I opened the freezer. The note was tucked behind the frozen peas, exactly where I'd eventually find it. I pulled it out, hands shaking slightly, and read the cramped handwriting on the back of a grocery receipt. "It's not the cold that'll kill you. It's what the cold keeps fresh." I stood there, staring at those words, my breath fogging in the chill of the open freezer. What the hell did that mean? I checked the date on the receipt. October 15th, 2 weeks before Daniel left. I spent the rest of the day searching the house for anything else he might have left behind. Notes, journals, anything. In the office, I found a logbook where caretakers were supposed to record daily maintenance and observations. Daniel's entries were sparse, mostly just weather notes and system checks. But in the last week, the tone changed. November 3rd, saw it again on camera 12. Same spot, same time. November 5th, no footprints, checked 3 times, nothing there. November 7th, heard something on the roof last night. Heavy, like footsteps. November 9th, it was at the window. That was the last entry, 2 days before I arrived. My hands were shaking when I closed the logbook. I wanted to leave, pack my car, and drive down the mountain and never look back. But I thought about my bank account, my lack of prospects, the fact that I'd signed a contract, and besides, what was I running from? A figure on a camera that might be a glitch? A cryptic note that could mean anything? I decided to stay. But I'd be careful. I'd follow the rules. Don't go outside at night. Check the cameras. Keep records. December came with a vengeance. A storm rolled in that lasted 4 days, dumping 3 feet of snow. The driveway disappeared. The solar panels stopped producing. The generator kicked on, rumbling steadily in the shed. I stayed inside, watching the world turn white, feeling the house shrink around me. On the third night of the storm, I checked the cameras before bed. Feed 12 showed the figure on the deck. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were 5 of them, all standing at the railing, evenly spaced, facing the valley, all identical in posture and stillness. I stared at the monitor, my skin crawling. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't my imagination. This was something else. I grabbed the logbook and started writing, my handwriting shaky. December 3rd, 5 figures on back deck, camera 12, no footprints, storm ongoing, generator operational, request immediate. I stopped. Request immediate what? Help? Investigation? I'd already called Miss Chen. She dismissed it. I looked back at the monitor. The figures were still there. As I watched, a 6th appeared, stepping into frame from the right side of the screen. It moved smoothly, without footprints appearing in the snow, and took its place at the railing. Then a 7th, then an 8th. I turned the monitor off and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and the house groan, and I thought about Daniel's note. It's not the cold that'll kill you. It's what the cold keeps fresh. The next morning, I forced myself to check the back deck. The snow was pristine. No footprints, no disturbance, but something felt wrong about the space. The air was colder there, sharp enough to make my eyes water. And when I stood at the railing, looking out at the valley, I felt a pull, like something was tugging gently at my chest, urging me to lean forward. Just a little further. Just enough. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and retreated into the house. The storms kept coming. By mid-December, I'd plowed the driveway 6 times, and each time the snow was back within a day. The world outside became a white void. The trees disappeared into the haze. The valley vanished. There was only the house, the snow, and the silence. And the figures, they appeared every night now. Sometimes 5, sometimes a dozen. Always on the back deck, always facing away. I stopped checking that camera. I couldn't handle it anymore, but I knew they were there. I could feel them. On December 18th, the generator died. I was in the kitchen when the lights flickered and went out. The heater shut off. The hum of the refrigerator died. The house fell into silence, so absolute it felt like being underwater. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the shed. The snow was knee-deep, and every step was an effort. By the time I reached the generator, I was sweating, despite the cold. The engine wouldn't turn over. I checked the fuel line, the spark plug, the oil. Everything looked fine. I tried again. Nothing. It was like the machine had just given up. I stood there in the shed, my breath fogging, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and I realized how completely alone I was. No power, no heat, no way to call for help. The landline was dead without electricity. The satellite internet required power. I had my phone, but there was no signal this far into the mountains. I thought about hiking out. The main road was 3 miles away, and from there, another 20 to anything resembling civilization. But in this weather, in these conditions, I'd never make it. I'd freeze or get lost, or both. I went back to the house and started a fire in the main fireplace. The flames helped, but the heat barely reached beyond the living room. The house was too big, too open. The cold seeped in through the walls, through the windows, turning my breath to fog. I dragged my mattress down from the third floor and set it up near the fireplace. I wore every layer I had. I kept the fire going constantly, feeding it logs from the dwindling pile in the shed. That night, I heard footsteps on the roof. They were slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth directly above me. I lay on the mattress, staring up at the vaulted ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm, left to right to left, over and over. It wasn't wind, it wasn't branches, it was footsteps. I thought about Daniel's log. Heard something on the roof last night, heavy, like footsteps. The sound continued for hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to silence and pale gray light filtering through the windows. The fire had burned down to embers. The house was freezing. I rebuilt the fire, my hands numb, and then I made a decision. I was going to hike out. I didn't care about the contract, the money, any of it. I just needed to leave. I packed a bag with supplies, food, water, extra clothes, matches. I put on every warm thing I owned. I found the snowshoes in the shed and strapped them on, and then I started down the driveway. The snow was deep, but the snowshoes helped. I made good progress for the first half mile. The trees closed in around me, their branches heavy with white. The sky was gray, promising more snow, but I figured I had a few hours before it started. At the 1 mile mark, I passed a tree with a distinctive split trunk. I'd noticed it before during my perimeter checks. I kept walking. 20 minutes later, I passed the same tree. I stopped, staring at the split trunk, my heart sinking. That wasn't possible. I'd been walking in a straight line, following the driveway. I kept going, moving faster now, my breath coming hard. The driveway curved gently, the way I remembered. The trees thinned slightly. I should be close to the gate, and then I saw the house. I was back at the starting point, standing in front of the main entrance, my own snowshoe tracks leading away and then somehow looping back. I tried again, same result, and again, every time, no matter how carefully I followed the driveway, I ended up back at the house. The snow started falling around 3 p.m. Big, heavy flakes that came down thick and fast. I gave up trying to leave and went back inside, defeated. That night, I didn't bother checking the cameras. What was the point? Instead, I sat by the fire, beating the logs, and thought about what Daniel had written. It's not the cold that'll kill you, it's what the cold keeps fresh. Fresh, preserved. The cold kept things from decaying, kept them intact. I looked around the house. This huge, pristine structure that no one really lived in, that the owner only visited twice a year, that cycled through caretakers who never lasted a full season. What if it wasn't the cold keeping something fresh? What if it was the house? What if the house was keeping us? I stood up and walked to the back doors, the ones that led to the deck. Through the glass, I could see them, dozens of figures, standing at the railing, shoulder to shoulder, all facing the valley. They were clearer now, more defined. I could make out details, clothing, the shapes of heads and hands. They all looked the same. They all looked like me. I backed away from the door, my stomach churning. I ran upstairs, grabbed the logbook, and flipped through the entries. different handwriting, different names, different dates, going back years. But all of them describe the same things: the figure on the deck, the footsteps on the roof, the sense of being watched, the inability to leave. And then I found an entry from 5 years ago, when the house had just been built. Owner requested modifications to security system, additional cameras, motion sensors, thermal imaging. Said he wanted to capture something. When I asked what, he said I'd understand when I saw it. I dropped the book, my hand shaking. Victor Hale, the billionaire who owned this place, who came up here twice a year, who hired caretakers for the winter and paid them well to stay isolated. What the hell was he doing? I spent the next 3 days barely moving from the fireplace. The cold was constant now, seeping into my bones. I went through firewood faster than I should have. My supplies were running low. The next delivery wasn't scheduled until January 1st, and I had no way to contact anyone to move it up. On the third night, I woke to find the fire had gone out. The house was pitch black, colder than I'd ever felt. My breath came out in white clouds. My fingers were numb. I fumbled for a flashlight, clicked it on, and saw them. The figures. Inside the house. Standing in the living room. Arranged in a semicircle around my mattress. There were so many I couldn't count. All of them facing me. All of them with my face. I screamed, scrambling backward, and the flashlight beam swung wildly across their features. Pale skin, empty eyes, mouths slightly open, and then one of them moved. Just slightly, its head tilted to the side, like it was curious. I ran, grabbed my bag, stumbled toward the front door, threw it open, and plunged out into the snow without snowshoes, without thinking. The cold hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I just ran, floundering through the drifts, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. Behind me, I heard the door slam shut, and then I heard footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, crunching through the snow, following me. I didn't look back. I just ran, aiming for the tree line, thinking if I could just get into the forest, maybe I could hide, maybe I could. My foot caught on something buried under the snow. I went down hard, face first, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Snow filled my mouth, my nose. I pushed myself up, gasping, and turned around. They stood at the edge of the porch, all of them, dozens of Mez, perfectly still, watching me struggle in the snow. And then, slowly, they started to walk toward me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. The cold had already seeped too deep. My vision blurred. The figures got closer, their faces expressionless, their movements synchronized. The last thing I remember is one of them kneeling beside me, reaching out a hand, and feeling something pull away from my chest. Not physically. Something else. Something deeper. I woke up on the mattress by the fireplace. The fire was burning. My clothes were dry. There was no sign I'd ever gone outside. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, a hypothermia-induced hallucination. But when I looked at my hands, I saw that my fingernails were blue. And when I stood up, I felt wrong, lighter, like parts of me were missing. I walked to the back doors. The figures were still there on the deck, but there was one more than before. One of them was facing the house, hands pressed against the glass, staring in at me. It had my face, my exact face, down to the scar on my left eyebrow, the one I got falling off a bike when I was 8. It mouthed something. Help me. I stepped back, my mind fracturing. That's when I understood what Daniel had been trying to warn me about. The cold doesn't kill you, it preserves you. It keeps you fresh. And the house collects. Every caretaker who'd stayed here, every person who'd gotten too close, we were all still here. Pieces of us. Anyway, pulled out into the cold, frozen in place, kept on display like trophies while something else wore our skin and walked through our lives. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at myself on the other side of the glass. Time felt strange, slippery. Eventually, I turned away and walked to the office. I picked up the logbook and wrote this entry. I'm writing it now, actually. My handwriting's steady, even though I know it shouldn't be. Even though some part of me that used to control my hands isn't here anymore. If you're reading this, you're probably the next caretaker. One who will come in April or May when the snow melts and the roads are clear. You'll find the house in perfect condition. You'll find the logs all filled out, the maintenance completed. You'll find me, probably, smiling and helpful, ready to hand off the keys and tell you what a great winter it was. Don't believe me, don't stay. Because I can feel it now, the thing that's wearing my shape. It's getting better at pretending. It knows my memories, my voice, my mannerisms. By the time the snow melts, it'll be perfect. And the real me, whatever's left, will be out there on the deck with the others, frozen, preserved, watching. The cold doesn't kill you. It just keeps what it takes. In this house takes everything. So if you ever see a job posting for a winter caretaker position, especially one that pays too well for what it's asking, read the fine print, check the history, find out what happened to the person before you. Because some places don't need caretakers, they need collectors. And once winter comes, once that first deep snow falls and the roads close and you're truly alone, that's when you'll find out which one you signed up for. The rental cabin's maintenance log had one entry I wish I'd read before unpacking. Guest reported knocking. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. Contract terminated. It was dated 3 days ago. I found it in the kitchen drawer under a stack of takeout menus and guest information pamphlets written in angry capital letters with a red pen. By the time I saw it, I'd already been there for 2 nights. By the time I understood what it meant, it was too late to leave. But let me start at the beginning. My name is Jake Brennan, and I'm a freelance photographer based out of Portland, Oregon. I shoot mostly editorial work, outdoor lifestyle stuff, the kind of images that end up in hiking magazines and tourism campaigns. In early March of 2024, I booked a cabin in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest for a solo shoot. I needed fresh content for my portfolio, and the listing promised exactly what I was looking for. Remote location, old-growth forest, dramatic lighting, total privacy. The cabin was listed on one of those vacation rental sites. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, full kitchen, wood stove. The photos showed a classic A-frame structure with a wall of windows facing a dense stand of Douglas fir. The reviews were mostly positive, peaceful, secluded, perfect for disconnecting. A few mentioned the lack of cell service, but that was expected this far into the forest. One review, dated from the previous October, said, "Beautiful location, but we left after 1 night. Strange noises." Host was unresponsive to concerns. It had 2 stars. I almost passed on the place because of it, but the host had replied with a lengthy explanation about how the guest had been disturbed by normal forest sounds and wildlife, completely expected in a remote area, and offered a partial refund for their trouble. I figured the guests were just city people who'd never spent time in actual wilderness. I grew up camping. I knew what forest sounded like at night, and I should have read between the lines. The drive from Portland took about 3 hours, the last 40 minutes on Forest Service roads that got progressively narrower and rougher. My Subaru handled it fine, but I passed maybe 2 other vehicles the entire way. The turnoff to the cabin was marked by a small wooden sign that just had the address burned into it, easy to miss if you weren't looking. The driveway was a 1/4 mile of packed gravel that wound through thick timber. Moss hung from the branches. Ferns covered the ground. Everything was green and damp, the air heavy with the smell of cedar and soil. When I finally reached the clearing, the cabin looked exactly like the photos. Dark wood, steep roof, that massive window reflecting the trees. I parked, grabbed my gear, and let myself in with the lockbox code the host had sent. The interior was clean, well maintained, comfortably furnished. Leather couch, stone fireplace, kitchen with modern appliances. My boots echoed on the hardwood as I walked through, checking out the bedrooms, the loft, the deck that wrapped around the back. It was perfect. Exactly what I needed. I spent the first afternoon scouting locations around the property. The cabin sat on about 10 acres, most of it forested, with a small creek running along the eastern boundary. The light filtering through the canopy was incredible, these long shafts of gold cutting through the green. I shot 2 memory cards worth of images, already planning the next day's sessions. As the sun started to set, I headed back to the cabin, made dinner, and built a fire. I'd brought a bottle of whiskey and a couple books, planning to spend the evening relaxing. I sat on the couch with my feet up, listening to the fire crackle and the wind move through the trees outside. That's when I heard the first knock. It came from the front door. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. Knock, knock, knock. I looked up from my book, frowning. I wasn't expecting anyone. The host had said they wouldn't be checking in on me. The nearest neighbor, according to the listing, was 2 miles away. I set my book down and walked to the door, thinking maybe it was a ranger or a lost hiker. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door. Nobody there. I stepped out onto the porch, looking around. The driveway was empty. The trees were dark and still. My car sat where I'd parked it, undisturbed. The only sound was the faint rush of the creek in the distance. "Hello?" I called. My voice disappeared into the forest, swallowed by the density of the trees. No response, no movement. I went back inside, locked the door, and told myself it was a branch hitting the side of the cabin, or maybe an animal bumping into the porch railing. Nothing to worry about. I tried to go back to reading, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for another knock. It didn't come. After about an hour, I convinced myself I'd imagined it or misidentified the sound. I went to bed around 11, choosing the master bedroom on the main floor. The bed was comfortable, the room warm from the fire still burning in the living room. I fell asleep easily. I woke to knocking. The same pattern. 3 sharp raps, but this time they were coming from the bedroom window. I sat up, my heart already pounding, and looked at the glass. The curtains were drawn, just a thin barrier between me and whatever was outside. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Deliberate, insistent. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turned on the flashlight, and approached the window. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the curtain. I pulled it back fast, shining the light outside. Nothing. Just darkness and the vague shapes of trees. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. The forest was completely still. No wind, no animals, just that heavy, watching silence. The knocking didn't return that night. I didn't sleep much after that, though. I lay in bed listening, every nerve on edge, until gray light started filtering through the curtains. In the morning, I checked the area around the bedroom window. No footprints in the soft soil, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been there. I walked the perimeter of the entire cabin, looking for evidence of wildlife or trespassers. Nothing. I made coffee and tried to rationalize what I'd heard. Branches in the wind, settling sounds from the cabin, thermal expansion and contraction. All the logical explanations I could think of. I decided to stay. I'd paid for 3 nights, and I needed the photos. Besides, I wasn't going to let some unexplained noises run me off. I dealt with weird sounds in the wilderness before. This was no different. That's what I told myself anyway. I spent the second day shooting. The weather was overcast, which actually worked perfectly for the mood I was going for. moody, atmospheric forest scenes. I found a fallen log covered in moss that made for great compositions. I shot the creek from multiple angles. I climbed a small ridge and got some elevated shots of the canopy. By late afternoon, I'd gotten some of my best work in months. I headed back to the cabin, feeling accomplished, almost having forgotten about the previous night. I made dinner, poured another whiskey, and settled in by the fire. This time, I turned on the TV, finding a station that came through the antenna mounted on the roof. Some nature documentary, background noise to fill the silence. The knocking started at 8:43 p.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch when it happened, some instinct telling me to document it. 3 knocks on the front door, same pattern as before. Knock, knock, knock. I muted the TV and sat frozen on the couch, staring at the door. My pulse hammered in my ears. The knocking came again, same rhythm, same intensity. I stood up slowly, moving toward the door. This time I wasn't opening it. This time I was going to look through the peephole first. I put my eye to the small glass circle. The porch light was on, illuminating the wooden planks and the railing beyond. Empty. Nobody there. As I watched, the knocking came again. But this time, I could see that the door wasn't moving. The sound was definitely coming from the door, right in front of me. But there was no corresponding vibration, no impact. It was like the sound and the action were disconnected. I backed away from the door, a chill running down my spine. That wasn't wind. That wasn't an animal. That was something else entirely. The knocking continued for the next 20 minutes. Always 3 raps. Always the same interval between them. Sometimes on the front door. Sometimes on the back door. Once on the window in the kitchen. Each time, when I looked, there was nothing there. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the knocking. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, a fire poker in my hand, until well past midnight. Nothing else happened. Eventually, exhausted, I dragged myself to bed. That's when I remembered the maintenance log. Most rental cabins have them, little notebooks where guests can report issues or leave comments for the owner. I'd seen it in the kitchen drawer when I'd been looking for a corkscrew on the first night, but I hadn't bothered to read through it. I got up, went to the kitchen, and pulled out the drawer. The log was a standard spiral-bound notebook with a label on the cover that said guest comments and maintenance issues. I opened it to the first page. The entries went back about 2 years. Most were mundane. Arrived safely, beautiful place, ran out of propane, refilled tank, light bulb burned out in bathroom, normal stuff. But as I flipped through, I started noticing a pattern. So, every few months, there'd be an entry about sounds. June 15th, 2022. Heard knocking on windows at night. Assumed wildlife, but it was persistent and strange. Otherwise, nice stay. September 3rd, 2022. Something kept knocking on the doors. Checked multiple times, never saw anything. Left a day early. December 20th, 2022. The knocking is not wildlife. It follows you. Please address this issue. The handwriting got more agitated as the entries progressed. By early 2023, the tone had changed completely. February 8th, 2023. Do not stay here. Whatever is knocking is not human. It tried to get me to open the door. It was using my wife's voice. That entry had been scribbled out, but I could still read it through the black ink. The next entry was from the host, February 9th, 2023. Guest experienced paranoid episode due to isolation. No evidence of any disturbance. Cabin checked and cleared. After that, the entries were sparse. A few guests mentioned the cabin being peaceful and quiet. No mention of knocking. I started to think maybe The problem had resolved itself, whatever it was. Then I reached the most recent entry, 3 days before my arrival, March 8th, 2024. Guest reported knocking. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. Contract terminated. It was written in red pen, capital letters, the handwriting sharp and aggressive. There was no follow-up from the host, no explanation, just that single warning. I stared at the page, my hand starting to shake. I flipped forward, hoping for more information, but the rest of the pages were blank. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd try to get cell service, drive down the road if I had to, and call the host. But when I unlocked the screen, I saw I had no signal, not even one bar. I'd have to drive at least 10 miles to reach coverage. I looked at the time, 11:38 p.m. I could pack up and leave right now, drive through the night, get the hell out of here. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was the money I'd spent on the rental, maybe it was the photographer in me that needed to understand what I was dealing with. Whatever it was, I decided to stay one more night. I'd follow the rule from the log. Don't answer. Don't acknowledge. I put the log back in the drawer and returned to the bedroom. I left all the lights on in the main room and locked the bedroom door from the inside. Then I lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The knocking started at 1:15 a.m. This time it was on the bedroom door. Same pattern. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I stared at the door, watching for the handle to turn for any sign of forced entry. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. I counted the seconds between the sets of knocks. 30 seconds, like clockwork. After about 10 minutes, the knocking moved. It came from the bedroom window again. I watched the curtains, expecting them to move, expecting to see a silhouette. Nothing, just the sound, hollow and wrong. Then it came from the wall beside the bed. Impossible, because that wall backed to a bathroom. But there it was. Knock, knock, knock. So close, I could feel the vibration through the pillow. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. I wanted to yell at it to stop. I wanted to run, but the entry in the log played over and over in my head. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. So I lay there in silence, enduring it. The knocking continued for 2 hours. It circled the room, moving from door to window to walls to ceiling. At one point it sounded like it was coming from under the bed. Always the same rhythm. Always that hollow, sourceless quality. And then, at 3:17 a.m., it stopped. The silence rushed back in, thick and oppressive. I lay there trembling, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just waited for sunrise, watching the window for the first hint of gray. When morning finally came, I got up and checked the cabin. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No signs of disturbance. The doors were still locked, the windows intact. Outside, the forest was peaceful, birds singing, light filtering through the canopy. In the daylight, it almost felt like I'd imagined it. I made coffee, my hands still shaking slightly, and sat at the kitchen table. I had one more night on my rental. I could leave now, cut my losses, forfeit the last night's payment, or I could stay, get the rest of my shots, and deal with one more night of knocking. The rational part of my brain said to leave. The stubborn part said I'd survived last night by not engaging, and I could do it again. I decided to stay, but I was going to do some research first. I drove down the Forest Service Road until I got cell signal, parked at a pullout, and started searching. I looked up the address of the cabin, the surrounding area, any news articles or historical information I could find. I found a forum post from 4 years ago on a paranormal discussion site. Someone had stayed at a cabin in this area and described experiences almost identical to mine. Knocking, with no source. Movement around the structure, a sense of being watched. They'd left after 2 nights. In the comments, someone had posted a response. Sounds like you encountered a knocker. Old folklore from mining communities. They knock to warn of danger or to lure people outside. Rule is simple. Never acknowledge them. Never answer. They feed on attention. Another comment. Not just mining folklore. Indigenous peoples in the PNW have stories about forest spirits that test people. The knocking is a challenge. If you respond, you give them permission to cross the threshold. Stay silent. Stay inside. And they'll eventually move on. I sat in my car, reading through dozens of similar accounts, different locations, different time periods, but the same core experience. Knocking with no source, the compulsion to open the door, and the universal warning, don't respond. I drove back to the cabin with a plan. I'd spend the day shooting, stay inside after dark, and no matter what happened, I wouldn't acknowledge the knocking. One more night, and I'd leave at first light. The afternoon was productive. I got some incredible shots near the creek, a golden light streaming through the trees. The kind of images I'd been hoping for. I worked until the sun started to set, then headed back to the cabin. I locked all the doors and windows. I built up the fire. I made dinner and ate it mechanically, not really tasting it. I kept glancing at the clock, watching the minutes tick toward darkness. The knocking started earlier that night, 7:30 p.m. Still light enough to see outside. It came from the front door. Same 3 knocks. I was sitting on the couch, and I forced myself to stay still, to keep my eyes on the book in my lap even though I wasn't reading. The knocking continued. Every 30 seconds. Methodical, patient. After about 15 minutes, something changed. A voice came through the door. Hello? Is someone there? I need help. It was a woman's voice. Strained, frightened, completely convincing. My heart rate spiked. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, to check, to help. But I remembered the log entry. It was using my wife's voice. Please, the voice called. My car broke down. I've been walking for hours. I saw your lights. Please, I need to use your phone. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles white on the book. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. There was no car. There were no headlights. I hadn't heard an engine. Hello? The voice was closer now, right against the door. I can hear you in there. Please. I'm freezing. The doorknob rattled. I stood up, backing away from the door, my pulse thundering. The knocking came again, harder now, desperate. The voice shifted, became pleading. Please, don't leave me out here. It's getting dark. There's something in the trees. I moved to the kitchen, putting distance between myself and the front door. The voice followed me, coming from the back door now. Let me in, please. Just for a minute. I won't bother you. Then it came from the windows. Multiple voices now, all talking at once. A man, a woman, a child, all begging, all pleading. We're lost. We need help. Please don't ignore us. We've been out here so long. I covered my ears, but I could still hear them. The voices overlapped, creating this horrible chorus of desperation that made my chest ache. I wanted to help. Every fiber of my being wanted to open that door, but I didn't. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands over my ears, eyes squeezed shut, and I waited. The voices continued for an hour. They cycled through different people, different stories. A ranger who'd gotten separated from his group, a family whose car had gone off the road, a hiker with a broken ankle, each one perfectly crafted to trigger a response. And then, when none of that worked, the voices changed again. Jake. My eyes snapped open. That was my name. My actual name. Jake, it's Mom. Can you open the door? I need to talk to you. My mother's voice. Perfect inflection, perfect tone. For a second, I almost believed it. But my mother lived in Seattle. She had no idea I was here. Jake, please. I drove all the way out here. Don't leave me standing on the porch. I backed against the kitchen counter, shaking my head. Not real. Not her. Jake, I know you're in there. I can see you through the window. I looked at the kitchen window. The curtains were drawn. Whatever was out there couldn't see me. The voice hardened. Fine. Be that way. I didn't raise you to be so rude. Then it laughed. A sound that was almost my mother's laugh. But wrong. Too long. Too many teeth in it. The knocking resumed. Front door, back door, windows, walls. A cacophony of impacts that made the whole cabin feel like it was vibrating. The voices continued, cycling through people I knew. Friends, family members, old co-workers. Some I hadn't thought about in years. How did it know these names? How did it know these voices? I crouched on the kitchen floor, hands over my ears, and focused on breathing. In and out. In and out. Don't respond, don't acknowledge. The assault continued until midnight, and then, like someone had flipped a switch, it stopped. The silence was immediate and total. I stayed on the floor, muscles locked, waiting for it to start again. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 20. Nothing. I slowly lowered my hands and looked around. The cabin was still. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside, through the gaps in the curtains, I could see moonlight filtering through the trees. I stood up on shaky legs and checked the time. 12:07 a.m. I'd made it through the worst of it. I went to the bedroom, intending to try to get some sleep. I was exhausted, wrung out from the adrenaline. But as I reached for the bedroom door, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A key sliding into a lock. I spun around, staring at the front door. The deadbolt was turning. Slowly, deliberately, the door swung open with a soft creak. Nobody was there. The porch was empty, but the door stood wide open, moonlight spilling across the threshold. I ran forward and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt, my hands fumbling. I backed away, breathing hard. The back door opened. I heard it from the other room, the distinct sound of the latch clicking, hinges squeaking. I ran to the kitchen and found the back door standing open, the night air pouring in. I slammed it shut and locked it. The windows started opening, one by one, all around the cabin. I ran from room to room, closing them, locking them. But as soon as I'd secure one, another would open somewhere else. It was getting inside. Despite my silence, despite my refusal to acknowledge it, it was crossing the threshold anyway. I grabbed my keys and my camera bag and ran for the front door. I threw it open and sprinted to my car, not looking back, not thinking. I just needed to get out. I fumbled with my keys, finally got the door unlocked, threw myself inside and started the engine. The headlights flared to life, illuminating the front of the cabin. Every window was open now. Every door. The cabin gaped like a mouth. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the interior light, was a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its proportions were wrong. Limbs slightly too long. Head cocked at an angle that wasn't quite human. It stood perfectly still, watching me. I threw the car in reverse and gunned it down the driveway, branches scraping the sides. I didn't slow down until I hit the main Forest Service road, and even then, I kept my speed high, taking corners too fast, my heart hammering. I drove straight to the nearest town, a small place called Trout Lake, and pulled into a 24-hour gas station. I sat in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Around 4 a.m., I tried calling the cabin host. No answer. I left a voicemail explaining I'd left early due to concerning activity and wouldn't be returning. I didn't explain further. What would I even say? I drove back to Portland as soon as it was light enough. I kept expecting something to be wrong with the car, for it to break down and strand me on that empty Forest Service road, but nothing happened. I made it home without incident. 2 days later, I got an email from the rental platform. The host had filed a complaint. I'd left the cabin with all the doors and windows open, they said. Hadn't followed checkout procedures. They were keeping my deposit. I replied with a single line. Check your maintenance log. They never responded. I still have the photos I took during those 2 days. They're some of the best work I've ever done, but I can't look at them without remembering the sound of those voices. The knocking that came from nowhere. The figure in the doorway. About a month later, I was scrolling through the rental site and saw the cabin was listed again. New photos, same description, same promises of peaceful seclusion. The reviews from before March were still there, including the one that warned about strange noises. The reviews after my stay, all positive, 5 stars, quiet, relaxing, no disturbances. Either those guests got lucky, or they're lying, or maybe the thing that was there found what it was looking for and moved on. I don't know which possibility scares me more. What I do know is this: if you're ever staying somewhere remote and you hear knocking with no source, remember the rule. Don't answer, don't acknowledge, don't give it permission. Because some things are patient. They'll knock for hours, for nights, using voices that break your heart and pleas that claw at your conscience. They'll make you feel cruel for not helping, guilty for staying silent. But the moment you respond, the moment you open that door, or call out, or even just look directly at the source, you've let them in. Not just into the house, into you. And once they're in, they don't knock anymore. They don't need to. They're already home. The trail marker said Summit 2.4 miles at 9 a.m. At 4 p.m., I passed the same marker for the 8th time, and my footprints in the snow were getting closer together. I stood there staring at the wooden post, my breath coming out in ragged clouds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My boot prints from earlier in the day were still visible in the snow, a clear trail leading both directions from the marker, but they were forming a spiral pattern, each loop tighter than the last, like I'd been walking in gradually smaller circles without realizing it. That's not possible. I'd been following the trail. I'd been paying attention to the blazes, the markers, the terrain. I wasn't lost. I couldn't be lost. But I was passing the same point over and over again, and something was pulling my path inward. Let me back up and explain how I got here, because the context matters. The details matter. And maybe if I lay it all out, I can make sense of what happened to me on that mountain. My name is Connor Walsh, and I'm a 32-year-old high school biology teacher from Bend, Oregon. I'm not an inexperienced hiker. I've been backpacking since I was a kid, done dozens of trips in the Cascades, summited plenty of peaks. I know how to read a map, use a compass, recognize trail markers. I'm cautious, I'm prepared, and I don't take stupid risks, which is why what happened on Mount Adams makes no goddamn sense. I'd rented a cabin on the south side of the mountain for a long weekend in late February of 2024. It was a solo trip, something I'd been looking forward to for months. The school year was grinding me down, and I needed a few days of solitude to reset. The cabin was small but well equipped, about 8 miles from Trout Lake, accessed by a Forest Service road that required 4-wheel drive in winter. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sky that particular shade of gray that promises snow. The cabin was everything the listing had described. One room with a loft, wood stove, propane cook stove, and a stunning view of the mountain's south face. I unloaded my gear, got a fire going, and spent the evening planning my hike for the next day. The route I'd chosen was a loop trail that started about 3 miles from the cabin. It was rated moderate, roughly 7 miles total, with an elevation gain of about 1,800 feet to a ridge that offered panoramic views. The trailhead had parking for maybe 6 cars, but in late February I didn't expect to see anyone else. Most people avoided this area in winter. The snow could be unpredictable, and the weather changed fast. I checked the forecast before bed. Clear skies predicted for Saturday, temperatures in the mid-30s, light winds, perfect hiking weather. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., planning to get an early start. Saturday morning came cold and bright. I made coffee, ate a substantial breakfast, and triple-checked my pack. Water, snacks, first aid kit, emergency blanket, headlamp with extra batteries, fire starter, knife, map, compass, and my phone fully charged even though I knew there wouldn't be service on the mountain. I wore layers, base layer, fleece, down jacket, waterproof shell, good boots, gaiters, trekking poles. I wasn't messing around. The drive to the trailhead took 20 minutes on roads that were plowed but icy in spots. I parked in the empty lot at 8:30 a.m., the only vehicle there. The trailhead had a wooden kiosk with a faded map under plexiglass and a registry box where hikers were supposed to sign in. I filled out the form. Name, date, intended route, expected return time. I wrote that I'd be back by 3 p.m. The trail started out easy, winding through old-growth forest, dug fir and hemlock, their branches heavy with snow. The path was well marked with blue blazes painted on trees every 100 yards or so. The snow depth varied, maybe 6 inches on the trail, deeper in the drifts. My boots crunched through the top layer of crust, and the sound echoed in the quiet. I'd been hiking for about 45 minutes when I reached the first trail marker. It was a wooden post about 4 feet tall, with a routed sign that read, Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles, with an arrow pointing up the trail. Below that, a smaller sign, Return to Trailhead, 2.3 miles, with an arrow pointing back the way I'd come. I took a drink of water, adjusted my pack, and kept going. The trail started climbing more steeply, switchbacking up the side of a ridge. The trees thinned slightly, giving me glimpses of the valley below. Everything was pristine, untouched. No footprints but mine. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant traffic, just the sound of my breathing and my boots in the snow. It should have been peaceful. And at first, it was, but around the 1 hour mark, I started to feel off. Nothing I could point to specifically, just this growing sense of unease. I stopped several times and looked around, scanning the trees, listening. Nothing. No movement, no sounds, just that feeling, persistent and creeping. I told myself it was normal. Solo hiking does that sometimes. Your mind plays tricks when you're alone in the wilderness. I kept going. At 11 a.m., I reached the summit ridge. The views were worth every step. Mount Adams rose to the north, massive and white. To the south, I could see Mount Hood in the distance. The ridge was narrow, maybe 30 feet across, with steep drops on either side. Snow cornices overhung the edges, sculpted by wind into graceful curves. I ate lunch sitting on a rock, drinking hot coffee from my thermos, feeling accomplished. This was exactly what I'd needed. Space, silence, beauty. I took some photos with my phone, knowing they wouldn't do the view justice, but wanting to remember the moment. Then I packed up and started down, planning to complete the loop and be back in my car by early afternoon. The descent started easily enough. The trail dropped off the backside of the ridge, winding through a different section of forest. The blazes were still visible, the path clear. But after about 20 minutes, something felt wrong. The trees looked familiar, not in a general way, but specifically, I recognized a particular leaning snag, a cluster of 3 firs growing close together. I'd seen them before. On the way up, I stopped and pulled out my map. According to the route, the loop should have taken me through completely different terrain on the way down. I shouldn't be seeing the same landmarks. I checked my compass. I was heading roughly southeast, which matched what the map showed for the descent route. Everything seemed correct. I kept hiking, but the feeling of deja vu intensified. I passed a fallen log that looked exactly like one I'd stepped over earlier, a boulder with a distinctive split down the middle, the same snow-covered clearing. And then I saw it, the trail marker, Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. The exact same marker I passed on the way up. I stood there staring at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. The loop trail didn't come back to this point. It was supposed to descend through the eastern drainage and come out at a different section of the trailhead parking lot. I checked my watch. 12:15 p.m. I'd been descending for 45 minutes. I should be at least 2 miles from this marker. I pulled out my map again and tried to make sense of it. Maybe I'd misread the trail. Maybe I'd accidentally backtracked without realizing it. But no, the compass bearing was right, and I hadn't made any turns that would have looped me around. I decided to try again, paying more attention this time. I passed the marker and continued down the trail, counting my steps, watching every blaze, every landmark. The path descended gradually, winding through the trees. I recognized nothing. This was new terrain. Good. After 30 minutes, the trail bent around a large outcropping of rock. I followed it, my poles clicking against the packed snow, and there was the marker again. Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. My heart started pounding. This wasn't right. This was a navigation error. I'd been walking in a straight line down a clearly marked trail, and somehow I'd ended up back at the same spot. I looked at my watch, 12:50 p.m. I looked at the snow around the marker. My boot prints were there, multiple sets of them now, overlapping. The earliest ones were already starting to fill in slightly with windblown snow, but the pattern was unmistakable. I'd passed this point at least 3 times. I sat down on a nearby stump and forced myself to think logically. What were the possibilities? 1. I was reading the map wrong, but I'd checked multiple times, and I'm not an idiot. I know how to navigate. 2. The trail markers were wrong or duplicated. Maybe there were multiple posts with the same sign, but that seemed unlikely and wouldn't explain why I kept ending up at the same point. 3. I was experiencing some kind of medical event, confusion, disorientation, maybe early hypothermia, even though I felt fine. But my thinking seemed clear. I could do basic math, remember my route, operate my equipment, or something else, something I didn't want to consider. I stood up and tried a different approach. Instead of following the trail, I'd bushwhack straight down the mountain. Forget the marked path. Just pick a bearing and go. Eventually I'd hit the Forest Service road or a creek drainage or something that would orient me. I set my compass to due south and started walking. The terrain was rougher off trail, more deadfall to navigate around, deeper snow in places, but I kept to my bearing, checking it every few minutes. I hiked for an hour straight, never deviating from south. I should have covered at least 2 miles, probably more. I should have been well away from the trail, deep into untracked forest. When I stopped to rest, I looked around and felt my stomach drop. I was standing next to the trail marker, Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. It was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. I'd been walking in a straight line away from this point for an hour, and somehow I'd curved back to it without noticing. I checked my compass. It was working fine, the needle pointing steady north. My phone's GPS showed my location as stationary. According to the phone, I hadn't moved at all in the last hour. The track showed me at the same point, even though I'd clearly been walking. 2:15 p.m. The sun would set by 5:30. I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. I tried not to panic. Panic kills people in the wilderness. I took deep breaths, drank some water, ate a protein bar. I needed to stay calm and think. Okay, new plan. I'd follow the trail back up to the summit ridge. From there, I'd be able to see more of the surrounding terrain. Maybe I could spot the trailhead parking lot or the road. I could always retrace my route exactly back the way I'd come up. That had worked fine this morning. I started climbing. The trail rose steadily, and after about 30 minutes, I could see the ridge ahead through the trees. Almost there. Once I got back to the top, I'd reassess. The trail curved around a large boulder, and I stepped past it onto level ground. I was standing at the trail marker, Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. I hadn't climbed back to the ridge. I'd somehow looped back to this fucking marker again. My hands started shaking. This wasn't navigation error. This wasn't confusion. This was something wrong with the space itself. The mountain, the trail. Something was folding back on itself, and I was caught in the loop. I looked at the snow around the marker more carefully. My boot prints were everywhere now, dozens of tracks forming a chaotic pattern. But as I studied them, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The tracks were spiraling inward. Each time I'd passed this point, my path had curved slightly closer to the marker. The first track was maybe 10 feet away. The second was 8 feet. The third was 6 feet. My most recent track was less than 4 feet from the post. I was being drawn in, slowly, incrementally, but definitely something was pulling my path tighter with each loop. 3 p.m., 2.5 hours of daylight. I couldn't afford to keep wandering in circles. I forced myself to think. If this was some kind of spatial anomaly, some area where normal navigation didn't work, maybe there was a boundary, a point where the effect ended. I just had to find it. I started walking in a straight line away from the marker, counting steps out loud to keep myself focused. 1, 2, 3. I'd go 1,000 paces and see what happened. At 500 paces, I noticed the trees were getting denser. The spaces between them were narrower. By 700 paces, I was having to squeeze sideways in places, even though the forest had seemed relatively open before. At 800 paces, I couldn't go any further. The trees formed a solid wall, their trunks so close together I couldn't fit between them. I tried going left, then right, looking for a gap. There wasn't one. It was like the forest had closed up behind me. No, not behind me. I turned around and looked back the way I'd come. The trees were closing in from that direction too. The gaps I'd just walked through were narrower now, the trunks pressing closer together. I ran, sprinting back toward the trail, branches whipping at my face, my pack catching on limbs. The forest squeezed tighter, the spaces between trees shrinking. I had to turn sideways, then crawl. My pack got stuck, and I had to ditch it, leaving it wedged between two trunks. I squeezed through one last impossible gap and tumbled out onto the trail, gasping. The marker was right in front of me, 3 feet away. I scrambled backward, putting distance between myself and the post. My chest heaved. My hands were bleeding from scraping against bark. My pack was gone, along with most of my supplies. 3:45 p.m., maybe 90 minutes of light left. I sat in the snow, trying to control my breathing, and that's when I noticed the footprints again. The spiral pattern was tighter now. Every track I'd left was circling closer and closer to the marker, and the most recent one, the one I'd just made scrambling away from the forest wall, was less than 2 feet from the post. What happens when I reach it? What happens when the spiral closes completely? I didn't want to find out. I stood up, every muscle screaming at me to run, and I walked away from the marker, not following any bearing this time, not trying to navigate, just walking in whatever direction seemed to lead away from that post. The trail curved ahead, and I followed it. The terrain looked new, different, good. Maybe I was finally getting somewhere. 10 minutes later, I came around the bend, the marker, 18 inches away this time. I backed up slowly, not taking my eyes off the post. It was just a piece of wood with carved letters. Nothing special, but something about it felt wrong now, like it was pulling at me, creating its own gravity. I looked at the snow. The spiral was almost closed. My tracks formed a tight circle around the marker, each loop overlapping the last. If I took another lap, I'd probably pass within inches of the post. 4:15 p.m. Less than an hour of daylight. I sat down hard in the snow, my mind racing through options. I couldn't navigate out. I couldn't bushwhack out. The forest itself was working against me, funneling me back to this point. My supplies were gone. I had no shelter, no way to make fire, nothing but the clothes on my back. When darkness came, the temperature would drop to the teens. Without my pack, without any way to stay warm, I wouldn't survive the night. Unless I looked at the marker. What if that was the answer? What if the only way out was through? Everything was pulling me toward that post. Maybe I needed to stop resisting. It was an insane thought. Every instinct screamed against it. But I was out of options. I stood up and approached the marker. Up close, I could see the wood was old, weathered, the carved letters deep and precise. Someone had spent time on this, made it to last. The post was sunk at least 2 feet into the ground, solid and permanent. I reached out and touched it. The moment my fingers made contact with the wood, the world lurched. I can't describe it better than that. It was like reality skipped, like a scratched DVD jumping to a different scene. 1 second I was standing in late afternoon light with my hand on the marker, and the next second I was somewhere else. Same forest, same snow, but different. The light was wrong, coming from an angle that didn't match where the sun had been. The trees were in slightly different positions, and the marker, there were dozens of them. I was standing in a clearing maybe 30 yards across, and it was filled with trail markers. Hundreds of wooden posts, all identical, all with the same carved message. Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. They stood at irregular intervals, some clustered close together, others spaced farther apart. They covered every inch of the clearing, a forest of posts, and between them, in the snow, were footprints. Not just mine, dozens of different tracks, different boot treads, different stride lengths, all of them walking in spirals around the posts, all of them circling tighter and tighter until they reached the base of a marker and then stopped. No tracks leading away, just the spirals, closing in, ending. I backed up slowly, my breath coming in short gasps. How many people, how many hikers had gotten caught in this loop, drawn to this place, and never left? I looked down at my own feet and realized with a spike of terror that I was standing in a spiral. Not one I'd made consciously, but my path through the clearing had curved, following the same pattern as all the others. I forced myself to walk in a straight line toward the edge of the clearing. The markers seemed to lean toward me as I passed, like plants following the sun. I could feel their pull, a subtle tug at the base of my spine, urging me to turn around, to circle back. I reached the tree line and pushed into the forest. The trees were normal here, properly spaced, and I could see between them for maybe 50 yards. I picked a direction and ran, crashing through brush, not caring about the noise. Behind me, I heard something crack, then another crack, and another. I glanced back and saw the markers tipping over, falling toward me like dominoes, one after another. But they weren't just falling, they were pulling themselves along, their bases churning through the snow, following me. I ran harder, my lungs burning in the cold air. A stitch formed in my side. I ignored it. The cracking sounds continued behind me, getting closer. The trees ahead opened up, and I burst out onto a trail. A real trail, one I recognized from this morning. I could see blazes on the trees, and in the distance, down the slope, I saw something that nearly made me cry with relief. The parking lot. My car. Right there. I ran toward it, my legs feeling like rubber, my vision narrowing to that single point. The car. Safety. Just get to the car. Something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, face first in the snow. I rolled over and saw a wooden post wrapped around my leg, its base split into root-like tendrils that gripped my boot. The carved letters faced me. Summit Ridge, 2.4 miles. I kicked at it, slamming my free boot into the wood. It held tight. More markers were emerging from the tree line, tipping forward, pulling themselves along the ground like wounded animals. I kicked again, putting everything I had into it. The wood cracked. One more kick, and the post split completely, the tendrils going slack. I scrambled to my feet and ran the last 100 yards to the parking lot. My car was right where I'd left it, covered in a light dusting of snow. I dug my keys out of my pocket with shaking hands, clicked the unlock button, and threw myself into the driver's seat. I jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. Behind me, in the rearview mirror, I could see the markers reaching the edge of the parking lot. There were dozens of them now, all converging on my car. I threw it in reverse, tires spinning on the icy pavement, and backed up fast. One of the markers lunged forward and slammed into the front bumper. I heard plastic crack. I shifted into drive and floored it. The car fishtailed on the snow but found traction. I sped down the Forest Service road, going way too fast for the conditions, but I didn't slow down until I'd put at least 5 miles between me and that trailhead. When I finally stopped, pulled over at a turnout, I sat there, shaking for probably 20 minutes. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. My face was numb from cold. I had lost my pack, my poles, almost all my gear, but I was out. I drove back to the cabin, packed up everything I'd left there, and headed home that same night. I didn't sleep in that cabin again. I couldn't. The drive back to Bend took 3 hours, and I spent the whole time trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't. There's no rational explanation for trails that loop impossibly, for forests that close in on themselves, for markers that move. When I got home, I filed a report with the Forest Service. I described the trail, the marker, the loop. I made it sound less crazy than it was, framed it as a dangerous navigation hazard. The person on the phone took my information politely and said they'd look into it. 2 weeks later, I got a form letter thanking me for my concern. They'd sent a ranger to investigate. The trail was clear and properly marked. No hazards found. They noted that spatial disorientation can occur during solo winter hiking and recommended I take a wilderness navigation course. I let it go. What else could I do? But sometimes I think about those footprints in the clearing, all those spirals, all those hikers who walked tighter and tighter circles until they reached the center and stopped. Where did they go? What happened when the spiral closed? And I think about my own tracks, the pattern I'd been walking without knowing it. If I'd done one more loop, if I'd let the spiral close completely, would I be standing in that clearing right now? Another marker among the hundreds, rooted in place, waiting for the next hiker to pass by. I don't go solo hiking anymore. I don't care how experienced I am, how well prepared. I need someone else there. Another set of eyes. Someone to tell me if I'm walking in circles without realizing it. Because here's what really haunts me. I logged 7 hours on that mountain. 7 hours of walking. And according to my phone's GPS, I never moved more than 100 yards from where I started. 7 hours of motion with no distance covered, like I was on a treadmill, walking and walking, going nowhere. And if that could happen on a marked trail in a well-traveled forest, if space itself could fold back on itself and trap me there, what other places are like that? What other trails spiral inward, pulling hikers into patterns they can't see until it's too late? I don't have answers. I just know that when you're hiking alone and you start seeing the same landmarks over and over, when your path seems to curve without you meaning it to, when you feel that subtle pull toward a specific place, don't fight it with more walking. Stop, sit down, stay where you are until someone comes looking for you, because the more you move, the tighter the spiral gets. And eventually, if you keep walking, you'll reach the center, and nobody ever comes back from there. Our cabin shared a mile-long driveway with one other property. The realtor said the neighbors were very private. What she didn't say was that I'd see them in my windows every single night, standing in the exact same spot, never blinking. By the time I understood what they were, my wife was already walking toward their house in the middle of the night, and I was too late to stop her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when everything still made sense. My name is Nathan Gross, and in September of 2023, my wife Emma and I bought a cabin in the Olympic National Forest in Washington State. We'd been living in Tacoma for 8 years, both of us working tech jobs that paid well but ground us down. Emma was a project manager at a software company. I was a systems analyst. We spent 60 hours a week in offices with fluorescent lights, commuting through traffic, eating lunch at our desks. We'd been talking about getting a place in the mountains for years, somewhere we could escape on weekends, maybe spend a month or two working remotely during the summer. When the cabin listing popped up, it felt like fate. The property was 40 minutes from Port Angeles, accessible by a private gravel road that wound through old-growth cedar and hemlock. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, full kitchen, wood stove, generator backup. The photos showed a cozy A-frame with a deck overlooking a ravine. The price was suspiciously good, almost $30,000 under market value for the area. Why so cheap? Emma asked the realtor during our first showing. The realtor, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, smiled in that practiced way real estate agents do. The access road is shared with one other property. She said, some buyers find that off-putting. They want complete privacy. How close is the other cabin? I asked. About a quarter mile down the driveway. You can't see it from here. The owners are very private, keep to themselves. You'll barely know they're there. Emma and I walked the property. It really was beautiful. A dense forest on all sides, the ravine cutting a dramatic line through the landscape, moss covering everything. The cabin itself was solid, well maintained, just needed some cosmetic updates. What do you think? Emma asked as we stood on the deck. I think it's perfect, I said, and I meant it. We made an offer that day. The sellers accepted within 24 hours. A month later, we closed on the property and got the keys. The first few weekends were busy with moving in furniture, hanging curtains, stocking the kitchen. We'd drive up Friday nights, spend Saturday and Sunday fixing up the place, then head back to Tacoma for the work week. It was exactly what we'd hoped for. Peaceful, quiet, away from everything. We never saw the neighbors. Their driveway branched off from the main access road about halfway in, marked by a simple wooden sign that said private property, no trespassing. Their section disappeared into the trees, and we couldn't see anything beyond the first curve. Think we should introduce ourselves? Emma asked one Saturday as we drove past their turnoff. Patricia said they were private, I said. Let's give them space. If they want to meet us, they'll come by. That was our first mistake. We should have been more curious. We should ask questions. Everything changed in late October. We'd taken a full week off work, planning to spend it at the cabin doing some winterizing before the heavy rains came. We arrived on a Monday afternoon, the sky already gray and threatening. That first night, after dinner, Emma went to close the curtains in the living room. She stopped halfway, her hand frozen on the fabric. "Nathan," she said quietly, "come look at this." I walked over and followed her gaze out the window. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, was a light, a single point of illumination, steady and unmoving, coming from the direction of the neighbor's property. "That's their place?" Emma asked. "Must be," I said. "I guess they're home." We watched the light for a few minutes. It didn't flicker or move, just a constant glow through the darkness and trees. "Should we go say hello?" Emma suggested. I checked my watch. 8:30 p.m. "It's late. Let's do it tomorrow." We closed the curtains and went to bed. I fell asleep quickly, tired from the drive and the work we'd done that day. I woke to Emma shaking my shoulder. "Nathan, wake up." I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but I could see her silhouette against the window. She'd opened the curtain and was looking out. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. There's someone outside." That woke me up. I got out of bed and joined her at the window. She pointed toward the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. It took me a moment to see what she was seeing. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the basic shapes of the forest, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure. They were perfectly still, facing the cabin. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark human-shaped silhouette against the slightly lighter background of the forest. "How long have they been there?" I whispered. "I don't know." I woke up to use the bathroom and looked out, and there they were. We watched for several minutes. The figure didn't move, didn't shift weight or adjust position, just stood there, watching our cabin. "Maybe it's a deer," I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. "That's not a deer," Emma said. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, pointing it out the window. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trees and underbrush, but where the figure had been, there was nothing, just forest. "They're gone," Emma said. We stood at the window for another 10 minutes, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, no sounds from outside, just silence. "Probably a hiker," I said. "Someone cutting through. They saw our lights and got curious." "In the middle of the night?" Emma's voice was skeptical. "Or maybe it was a deer and the shadows just made it look human-shaped." She didn't respond, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I, really. But what else could it be? We went back to bed, though neither of us slept well. Every small sound made me tense, listening for footsteps or movement outside, but nothing happened. When dawn came, I got up and checked outside. No footprints in the soft soil near the tree line. No signs anyone had been there. The next night, it happened again. We were reading in the living room around 9 p.m. when Emma looked up from her book, Nathan. I followed her gaze to the window. We'd left the curtains open, and in the reflection of our interior lights, I could see the yard outside. Standing at the same spot as the previous night was the figure. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and headed for the door. "Wait," Emma said. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to see who that is. Maybe we should call someone." "Call who?" "We don't have cell service, and it's probably just a confused hiker." I stepped out onto the deck, flashlight in hand. The night air was cold and damp. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward where I'd seen the figure. Empty. Just trees and ferns and darkness. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" My voice echoed slightly and died in the dense forest. No response. I walked down the deck steps and into the yard, sweeping the flashlight beam across the tree line. Nothing. I walked all the way to where the figure had been standing, checking for footprints or any sign of a person. The ground was undisturbed. Behind me, I heard the cabin door open. "Nathan, come back inside." Emma called, her voice tight. I turned around and saw her silhouetted in the doorway. Behind her, visible through the living room window, was the figure. Inside the cabin. No, not inside. In the window. Standing right up against the glass from outside, pressed so close that their face would be touching it. Staring in at where Emma had been sitting moments before. "Emma," I shouted. "Get away from the window." She turned, saw what I was seeing, and stumbled backward. The figure remained motionless, just this dark shape pressed against the glass. I ran toward the cabin, flashlight bouncing, my heart hammering. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was definitely a person, or at least person-shaped. Tall, wearing dark clothing, but their face. I couldn't see their face. It was like looking at a blur, a smudge. In reality, where features should be. I reached the deck and pointed my flashlight directly at the window. The beam hit the glass and reflected back, blinding me for a second. When my vision cleared, the figure was gone. I ran around the side of the cabin, checking the other windows. Nothing. No one. I made a complete circuit of the building, then did it again. Whoever or whatever had been there had vanished completely. Emma was standing in the middle of the living room when I came back inside, her arms wrapped around herself. What the hell was that? I don't know. I locked the door and checked all the windows, making sure they were secure, but they're gone now. They were right there, Nathan, right against the glass. How did they get from the tree line to the cabin without you seeing them? I didn't have an answer. The distance from the tree line to the cabin was 50 yards of open ground. Even if they'd moved the moment I turned my back, I would have seen them crossing the yard when I turned around, unless they'd run. But I hadn't heard footsteps. We closed all the curtains and dragged a chair in front of the door. Neither of us slept that night. We sat in the living room with every light on, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I went outside and checked the ground under the living room window. The soil there was soft, slightly damp from recent rain. If someone had been standing there, pressed against the glass, there would be footprints. There were none. The ground was completely undisturbed. "This doesn't make sense," I said to Emma over breakfast. "It's like they're not physically there. Like we're seeing, I don't know, shadows, projections." "It looked real to me," Emma said. She barely touched her food. Dark circles hung under her eyes. "I think we should leave." "And go where? Back to Tacoma? We took the whole week off. Besides, it's probably just what, Nathan? Someone playing pranks? That's not funny, that's threatening." She was right, of course. But I didn't want to admit defeat. We just bought this place. We'd put our savings into it. And I still half believed there was a rational explanation. "Let's give it one more night," I said. "If it happens again, we'll pack up and leave tomorrow." "Okay." She didn't look happy about it, but she agreed. We spent the day working on the cabin, trying to keep busy. I installed better locks on the doors and windows. Emma organized the kitchen. We didn't talk about the figure, but I could tell it was on both our minds. That afternoon, I decided to walk down to the neighbor's property. Maybe they'd seen something. Maybe they knew what was going on. The turnoff to their driveway was marked by that private property sign, weathered and faded. The driveway itself was 2 tire tracks through the forest, overgrown with ferns and brush. It didn't look like it had been used recently. I followed it for about a quarter mile, the path winding through increasingly dense trees, and then I saw their cabin. It was smaller than ours, single story, set in a clearing maybe 30 yards across. The structure was dark wood, almost black with age and moisture. The windows were covered with curtains from inside, and there were no vehicles visible. I approached slowly, feeling like an intruder. The place had an abandoned quality to it, like no one had been there in months. Dead leaves covered the small porch, A broken gutter hung loose from the eave. I climbed the porch steps and knocked on the door. The sound echoed hollowly. Hello? Anyone home? No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Hello? I'm Nathan, from the other cabin. Just wanted to introduce myself. Still nothing. I cupped my hands around my eyes and tried to peer through the gap in the curtains. It was too dark inside to see anything. I stood there for a moment, uncertain. The whole place felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but empty, lifeless, like a shell. I left a note tucked in the door frame with my name and our cabin number, asking them to stop by if they needed anything. Then I walked back to our place, that unsettled feeling following me the whole way. They weren't home, I told Emma when I got back. The place looks pretty deserted, actually. Maybe they're out of town. Maybe. But it didn't look like anyone had been there in a while. That night, we both sat in the living room, curtains drawn, waiting. 8 p.m. passed. 9, 10. Nothing happened. Maybe they got the message, Emma said, around 10:30. Maybe they realized they were scaring us and stopped. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. At 11 p.m., Emma went to brush her teeth. I heard the bathroom faucet running, heard her moving around. Then I heard her scream. I ran down the hall and found her standing frozen in front of the bathroom mirror. She was pointing at the window above the toilet, a small frosted glass window that looked out onto the side yard. Pressed against the glass from outside was a face. I could see it clearly, through the frosted glass, distorted but unmistakable. The shape of a head, the dark voids where eyes should be, the suggestion of a mouth. But the features were wrong, blurred, like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. I grabbed Emma and pulled her out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind us. We heard no sound of movement outside. No footsteps, no branches breaking, just silence. We're leaving, Emma said, her voice shaking. Right now. I don't care if it's the middle of the night. I didn't argue. We threw clothes into bags, grabbed our laptops and essentials, and headed for the car. I started the engine, turned on the headlights, and began backing down the driveway. The headlights swept across the front of the cabin as I turned. Standing on the deck were 3 figures. They were evenly spaced, all the same height, all wearing dark clothing, all facing the car with those blurred, featureless faces. Emma grabbed my arm. Go. Just go. I shifted into drive and accelerated down the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. In the rearview mirror, I watched the cabin disappear around a curve. The figures never moved. We drove fast down the access road, neither of us speaking. When we reached the junction where the neighbor's driveway branched off, I slowed slightly, my headlights sweeping across their turnoff. There were dozens of them, standing in the driveway, lining both sides of the path into the woods, were figures, all identical, all perfectly still, all watching as we drove past. Emma made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. I pressed harder on the accelerator. We didn't stop until we reached Port Angeles, pulling into a 24-hour diner parking lot. We sat there in the car, shaking, trying to process what we'd just seen. What were those things? Emma finally asked. I don't know. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. They weren't people. No, I couldn't argue with that. Whatever we'd seen, they weren't human. The way they stood, perfectly motionless, the blurred faces, the impossible way they moved without sound or trace. We stayed in a motel that night, barely sleeping. In the morning, I called Patricia, the realtor. We need to know about the neighbors, I said when she answered. The people who share our driveway. There was a pause on her end. What about them? Who are they? How long have they been there? Another pause, longer this time. Why are you asking? Because they've been on our property, standing outside our windows. We need to know who they are, so we can talk to them about boundaries. Mr. Cross. Patricia's voice changed. became more formal. The neighboring property has been vacant for 3 years. The previous owners died in a house fire. The land is in probate. There's no one living there. My stomach dropped. That's not possible. We've seen people. Multiple people. I assure you, the property is abandoned. If you've seen trespassers, you should contact the sheriff. We saw lights, Emma said, leaning closer to the phone. From their cabin, someone's been there. Mrs. Cross. I toured that property when it was listed. The cabin's completely uninhabitable. The fire damaged the interior extensively. There's no electricity, no running water, no functional systems. No one could be living there. We thanked her and hung up. Emma and I looked at each other. The cabin I visited looked fine, I said. Old, but intact. Nothing about fire damage. Maybe there are 2 cabins on that property, Emma suggested. Maybe the burned one is further in. It was a thin explanation, but we clung to it. That afternoon, after we'd gotten some sleep, we drove back. We had to know. We had to see the neighbor's place in daylight and confirm what Patricia had said. We parked at the junction and walked down the neighbor's driveway. In daylight, the overgrown nature of the path was even more obvious. Branches crossed overhead, creating a tunnel effect. Ferns pressed in from both sides. When we reached the clearing where the cabin stood, I stopped walking. The cabin was a burned-out ruin. The roof had collapsed inward. The walls were blackened and charred. The windows were empty holes, the glass long gone. The porch we'd seen intact was now a jumble of burnt boards. Whatever structure had once stood here had been destroyed completely. This is it? Emma asked. This is where you came yesterday? I nodded slowly, but it didn't look like this. It was whole, dark and old, but whole. We approached carefully, stepping over debris. The interior was completely gutted. Charred beams, melted fixtures, ash, nothing salvageable. Nothing that could produce light or shelter anyone. Nathan. Emma was looking at the porch, or what remained of it. Tucked between 2 charred boards was my note, the one I'd left in the door frame yesterday. The paper was pristine, untouched by fire or weather. I picked it up with shaking hands. My handwriting stared back at me. Hi, I'm Nathan from the other cabin. Just wanted to introduce myself. I left this in a door that doesn't exist anymore, I said quietly. We left quickly after that, nearly running back to the access road. When we reached our car, we sat inside with the doors locked, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We're seeing things that aren't there, Emma said. The cabin, the people. None of it's real, but we both saw them, and the note is real. And what's happening? Some kind of mass hallucination? I didn't have an answer. We sat there for a long time. The engine running, heater blasting, neither of us wanting to go back to our cabin but not knowing where else to go. We have to go back, I finally said. All our stuff is there, and it's daylight now. Whatever those things are, they only appear at night. Emma looked at me like I was crazy, but eventually she nodded. We drove back to our cabin, and in the afternoon sunlight, it looked completely normal. Peaceful, even, like nothing strange had ever happened. We spent the rest of the day packing. Everything we'd brought, every item we'd stored there, we were going to load it all up and leave. Sell the property if we had to, take the loss. It didn't matter. But packing took longer than expected. By the time we had everything in boxes, the sun was setting. We'll have to load the car in the morning, I said. It's too dark now. Emma didn't argue, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We made dinner, neither of us eating much. We sat in the living room with all the curtains closed, every light in the cabin blazing. 8 p.m. came and went. 9, 10. At 10:30, Emma stood up. I'm going to bed. Want me to come with you? She shook her head. One of us should keep watch. She went to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the couch, trying to read but unable to focus. Every few minutes, I'd check the windows, pulling back the curtains just enough to peek outside. At 11:15, I heard the bedroom door open. Emma walked past me, heading toward the front door. "Where are you going?" I asked. She didn't respond. Her movements were slow, dreamlike. She reached for the doorknob. I jumped up and grabbed her arm. "Emma, stop." She turned to look at me, and my blood went cold. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring past me at something I couldn't see. Her expression was blank, empty. "Emma?" I shook her gently. She blinked, and focus returned to her eyes. "Nathan?" "What? You were going outside." "I was?" She looked down at her hand on the doorknob, confused. "I was asleep. I was dreaming about. They were calling me. They wanted me to come visit. Who? The neighbors." She stepped back from the door, wrapping her arms around herself. "They said they wanted to be friends. They said I should come to their house." I pulled her away from the door, back to the couch. "You're not going anywhere. You were sleepwalking. I have never sleepwalked before." "Well, you are now. Stay with me. Don't go near the doors or windows." We sat together on the couch, Emma pressed against my side. I kept checking the time on my phone. Midnight came. 12:30, 1 a.m. At 1:45, Emma spoke in a quiet voice. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I think they were here before we saw them. I think they've been watching us since we first visited the property." "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been having dreams about them since the day we closed on the cabin. Dreams about people standing outside, watching our house in Tacoma, standing in our yard, pressed against our bedroom window. I thought they were just stress dreams about the move." A chill ran down my spine. "You never mentioned this." "Because they were just dreams. Until we came here and I saw them for real." She turned to look at me. "They knew us before we knew them. They were waiting. Waiting for what?" She opened her mouth to answer, but the words never came. Her eyes went unfocused again, and she stood up. "Emma, no." She walked toward the door, moving faster this time. I grabbed her, but she pulled away with surprising strength. She unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door before I could stop her. They were standing on the deck. 5 of them now, arranged in a semicircle, all identical, all with those blurred faces. But this time they weren't motionless. They were gesturing, slow beckoning movements, calling Emma forward. "Come with us," they said, all 5 of them speaking in perfect unison, their voices overlapping into a sound that wasn't quite human. "Come see our home." Emma took a step toward them. I grabbed her around the waist and pulled her back. She fought me, stronger than she should have been, making this awful keening sound in her throat. One of the figures stepped forward, reaching toward her. I slammed the door and locked it. Emma collapsed against me, sobbing. "They're in my head, Nathan. I can hear them in my head." I dragged her back to the bedroom and locked that door too. We sat on the bed, Emma shaking uncontrollably, while outside I heard footsteps on the deck, moving around the cabin, testing windows. "They want me to go there," Emma whispered. "To their house. They want to show me something." "You're not going anywhere." "I have to. That's what they're waiting for. That's what this whole thing is about. They need me to come to them. Why? I don't know." She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with terror. "But if I don't go, they're going to take me anyway." We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom. I pushed the dresser in front of the door, stacked chairs against the windows. Emma curled up on the bed, hands over her ears, muttering to herself. I stayed by the door, a tire iron from the car in my hands, listening. The sounds outside continued all night. Footsteps on the deck, on the roof, circling the cabin, scratching at the windows. That unified voice calling Emma's name over and over. Emma, come out, come home, come with us. She writhed on the bed, fighting whatever pull they had on her. Several times she got up and walked toward the door, and I had to physically restrain her. Each time, she fought harder. At 3 a.m., the sound stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. Emma went limp in my arms. "They're waiting," she said in a flat voice. "At their house. They've given up trying to get me to go willingly. They're just gonna wait. Eventually I'll sleep, and when I do, I'll go to them." "You're not sleeping. Neither of us are. We'll stay awake until morning, then we'll leave." But I was exhausted. We both were. Despite the adrenaline, despite the fear, I could feel my eyelids getting heavy. I kept jerking awake, realizing I'd dozed off for a few seconds. At 4:30 a.m., I woke up to find Emma gone. The dresser was still in front of the door. The windows were still locked, but Emma wasn't in the room. I ran through the cabin, searching every room, every closet. She wasn't there. The front door was still locked from inside. The back door the same. All the windows secure. But she was gone. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. Dawn was just starting to lighten the sky. That gray pre-dawn glow that made everything look flat and colorless. I ran down the driveway, calling Emma's name, my voice breaking. When I reached the neighbor's turnoff, I stopped. Their driveway was glowing, not with electric light, but with something else. A soft, cold luminescence that seemed to come from the ground itself, marking the path through the trees. I followed it, running now, branches whipping at my face. The light grew stronger as I approached the clearing. Emma was standing in front of the burned cabin, or where the burned cabin should have been, because the cabin was whole again, just like I had seen it on my first visit. Dark and old, but intact. The windows glowed with that same cold light, and standing on the porch were dozens of figures, all identical, all watching Emma as she climbed the steps toward them. "Emma!" I screamed. "Stop." She paused, one foot on the top step. She turned to look at me, and her face was expressionless, empty. "I have to go inside," she said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. "They've been waiting so long. They're lonely. Don't go in there. Please. Whatever they are, whatever they want, it's not worth it. They were the original owners," she said, still in that flat voice. "The ones who died in the fire. They never left. They've been here the whole time, watching the property, watching everyone who comes. They're so lonely, Nathan. They just want company." One of the figures on the porch extended a hand toward her. She took it. "If you go in there, you're not coming back," I said, my voice breaking. "I know." She looked at me one more time, and for just a second I saw my wife in those eyes, terrified but resigned. "I'm sorry." She turned and walked through the door. The figures followed her inside, one by one, until the porch was empty. The door closed, the lights inside the cabin went out, and the whole structure began to fade, becoming transparent, then disappearing completely. I was left standing in the clearing with the burned ruin, gray dawn light filtering through the trees. Emma was gone. I called the sheriff. I filed a missing persons report. Search teams combed the forest for 3 days and found nothing. No trace of Emma, no footprints, no evidence she'd ever been there. They questioned me extensively, looked at me as the obvious suspect. But my story never changed because it was the truth, and eventually they had to admit they had no evidence of foul play. Just a woman who vanished from a locked cabin without a trace. I sold the property at a loss 3 months later. I told the new buyers about the shared driveway, about the neighboring property. I didn't mention the rest. Who would believe me? Sometimes I drive back to that area. I park at the access road and walk up to where our cabin stood. The new owners have renovated it, added on, made it into something bright and modern. And sometimes, at dusk, I walk down to the neighbor's turnoff. The private property sign is still there. The driveway is still overgrown. And sometimes, if I stare long enough at that path leading into the trees, I can see a faint glow, and I can see figures standing in the distance, watching, waiting for the next person to hear them calling, the next person who'll walk down that driveway and up to a cabin that doesn't exist anymore, the next person who'll go inside and never come back. If you ever buy property in the mountains, check the history, find out what happened to the previous owners. And if the realtor tells you the neighbors are very private, ask them what that means. Because sometimes privacy isn't a choice. Sometimes it's a condition. Sometimes the neighbors aren't really neighbors at all. They're the ones who never left. The ones who burned but didn't die. The ones who wait in houses that exist somewhere between what was and what is. And once they've noticed you, once they've decided they want your company, they'll wait as long as it takes. They have nothing but time, and they're so very, very lonely. I bought the lakeside cabin for cheap because the previous owner drowned ice fishing. I didn't know he'd left his shack on the ice, or that something was still using it, drilling new holes every night in a pattern that was slowly circling toward shore. By the time I realized what the pattern meant, the holes had reached the dock, and I could hear drilling coming from underneath the cabin's floorboards. But I should start from the beginning, back when I thought I'd found the deal of a lifetime. My name is Austin Reed, and I'm a 38-year-old freelance writer from Minneapolis. I work from home, or at least I used to. In January of 2024, I was coming off a rough divorce and looking for a change. My ex-wife got the house, I got the debt, and I needed somewhere cheap to live while I rebuilt my life and finished the novel I'd been working on for 3 years. The cabin listing appeared on a foreclosure site, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 900 square feet, sitting on half an acre with direct lake access. The photos showed a small but solid structure, cedar siding weathered to silver gray, metal roof, a narrow dock extending 20 feet into the water. The lake was called Whitestone Lake, about 2 hours north of Duluth, too remote and small to be popular with tourists. The price was absurdly low, $37,000. In Minnesota's current market, you couldn't buy a parking space for that price. There had to be a catch. I called the listing agent, a guy named Tim, who handled a lot of foreclosed properties in northern Minnesota. "What's wrong with it?" I asked after introducing myself. "Nothing structural," Tim said. "Foundation solid, roof's good, septic system passed inspection last fall. It's priced low because of the circumstances." "What circumstances?" He paused. Previous owner died on the property. His estate went into foreclosure. Bank wants it gone. They're not interested in top dollar, just a quick sale. "How did he die?" Another pause. "Ice fishing accident. Last February. He went through the ice about 100 yards offshore. They didn't recover the body for 3 days." I felt a pang of sympathy, but death doesn't scare me. Houses don't hold on to trauma the way people think they do. That's tragic, but it doesn't affect the property value in my mind. "Most buyers feel differently," Tim said. "I've had it listed for 2 months. You're the first person who's asked for a showing." I drove up the following weekend. The cabin was exactly as advertised. Small, simple, functional. The interior needed cosmetic work, outdated appliances, some water staining on the ceiling from an old roof leak, but nothing I couldn't handle. The lake was beautiful, frozen solid, snow-covered, stretching out for maybe half a mile before meeting the tree line on the far shore. "What's that?" I asked Tim, pointing to a small structure sitting on the ice about 80 yards from shore. "Ice fishing shack," he said. "Belonged to the previous owner. It's been out there since before he died. Technically, it should have been removed by the end of March, but he shrugged. No one wanted to deal with it. Will it fall through when the ice melts? Probably. They usually do if no one pulls them off in time, but that's not your problem. Anything that was on the property before the sale isn't part of the purchase agreement. I looked at the shack. It was just a plywood box, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, painted dark green. I could see a stovepipe sticking out of the roof. It looked abandoned, forlorn, sitting out there in the middle of all that white. "I'll take it," I said. We closed 3 weeks later. I moved in on a gray, cold morning in mid-February, hauling my belongings up the snow-packed driveway in my aging Subaru. I didn't own much anymore. Clothes, books, my laptop, kitchen supplies, everything fit in one carload with room to spare. The cabin had propane heat, which was expensive but reliable. I got the thermostat up to 68 degrees and spent the first afternoon unpacking and cleaning. By evening, I'd made the place livable. I made dinner on the electric stove, drank a beer while watching the sun set over the frozen lake, and felt something close to contentment for the first time in months. I was going to be okay here. I was going to finish my book, get my life together, start fresh. That first night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no disturbances. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the bedroom window, painting the room in shades of white and gold. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the lake. The ice fishing shack was still there, sitting in the same spot. But there was something different about the ice around it. I grabbed my binoculars from the box of outdoor gear I hadn't unpacked yet and focused on the shack. There were new holes in the ice, at least a dozen of them, arranged in a rough circle about 10 feet from the shack. Dark spots against the white surface, clearly fresh because they hadn't filled in with snow yet. Someone had been ice fishing, either last night or early this morning. I scanned the lake for other people, other vehicles on the shore, any sign of activity. Nothing. The lake was deserted. No trucks parked on the ice. No snowmobiles. No fishermen. I lowered the binoculars, frowning. Maybe someone had been out there yesterday, before I arrived. The holes could be a few days old. I just hadn't noticed them during the showing because I hadn't been looking closely. I went back to unpacking, putting the observation out of my mind. I had work to do. I set up my desk in the bedroom facing the window, plugged in my laptop, and opened the document file for my novel. 342 pages, 70,000 words, about 2/3 done if I'd planned the structure correctly. I'd been staring at this manuscript for 3 years, rewriting the same chapters over and over, never quite satisfied. But here, in this new place, with no distractions, no reminders of my failed marriage, I felt like I could finally push through to the end. I wrote for 6 hours straight, barely stopping to eat. The words came easier than they had in months. By the time I looked up, it was dark outside, and I'd added 4,000 words. Good words. Words I'd actually keep. I made dinner, poured another beer, and stood at the window while I ate. The lake was a black void now, indistinguishable from the sky except for the faint stars reflecting on the snow. And out in that darkness, I could see a light, a warm orange glow coming from the ice fishing shack. I set down my plate and grabbed the binoculars. Through the lenses, I could see the shack clearly. Light was seeping through gaps in the walls, through the small window on the side facing me. Someone was definitely in there. I watched for 10 minutes. The light never flickered or moved. No shadows crossed the window. No smoke came from the stovepipe, even though the temperature outside was probably 15 degrees. I should go out there, I thought, introduce myself. Let them know the property had changed hands. Make sure they knew they were welcome to fish, but that the shack would need to be removed before ice out. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the cold, or my natural introversion, or the simple fact that I'd already changed into sweatpants and didn't feel like getting dressed again. Whatever it was, I decided it could wait until morning. I closed the curtains and went to bed. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of drilling. It was distant but distinct, a mechanical whine, rhythmic and purposeful, the sound of an ice auger chewing through frozen lake. I lay in bed listening, trying to place the direction. It was coming from outside, from the lake. Someone was drilling holes in the middle of the night. I got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. The lake was dark, but I could see the shack. The light inside was still burning, casting a faint glow on the surrounding ice. The drilling stopped. Silence rushed back in, thick and absolute. I stood at the window for another 5 minutes, watching. Nothing moved. The light remained steady. I went back to bed but didn't sleep well. Every small sound made me tense, listening for the drilling to start again. It didn't. In the morning, I pulled on my winter gear and walked down to the lake. The dock was buried under snow, but I could navigate to the end and get a better look at the shack. I climbed over the snowbank and made my way out onto the ice. The surface was solid, several feet thick this late in winter. My boots crunched through the top layer of snow, and the sound echoed across the empty lake. When I got about 30 yards from shore, I stopped. There were more holes, at least 20 new ones, arranged in concentric circles around the shack. The pattern was precise, mathematical. Each hole was exactly the same size, about 8 inches in diameter, drilled straight through the ice. The edges were clean, recent. Some of them still had slush floating in the water. I approached one of the holes carefully and looked down. The water beneath was black, impenetrable. I couldn't see the bottom. The hole went down through maybe 30 inches of ice, and below that was just darkness. I walked closer to the shack, stepping carefully around the holes. Up close, the structure looked even more decrepit than it had from shore. The plywood walls were weathered and splitting. The door hung crooked on its hinges. The window was covered from inside with what looked like a tarp or blanket. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone in there?" No response. I reached for the door handle, then hesitated. Something felt wrong about this. The light I'd seen last night, the fresh holes, the drilling at 3 a.m., none of it added up to a normal fishing situation. I knocked on the door instead. "Hello? I'm Austin. I own the cabin on shore. Just wanted to introduce myself." Still nothing. I waited for a full minute, then reached for the handle again. Before I could touch it, I heard a sound from inside. Not a voice, just a wet, sliding sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I backed away from the shack, my heart rate picking up. "I'm going to head back to shore. If you need anything, I'm in the cabin." The sliding sound continued, back and forth, deliberate and steady. I turned and walked quickly back toward shore, resisting the urge to run. When I reached the dock, I looked back. The shack sat there innocently, just a box on the ice, but I could still hear that sound in my head, that wet, dragging slide. I went inside and locked the door. I tried to work on my novel that afternoon, but I couldn't focus. I kept looking out at the lake, at the shack, at those circles of holes. Around 2 p.m., I gave up on writing and did some research instead. I found an article about the previous owner, a man named Gerald Hopper, 73 years old, lived alone, ice fished almost every day during winter. His body had been found 3 days after he went through the ice, caught on something beneath the surface about 50 yards from where his shack had been positioned. The article didn't provide many details about the recovery or the cause of the accident, just the basic facts. Experienced fisherman, tragic loss, reminder to check ice thickness before venturing out. I searched for more information about Whitestone Lake. It was deeper than I'd expected, 160 feet at its deepest point, fed by underground springs, which meant the ice thickness could vary unpredictably. Several drownings over the years, mostly in early winter or late spring when the ice was forming or breaking up. I found one interesting detail in a forum post from a local fishing group. Someone had asked about Whitestone Lake as a fishing spot, and one of the responses said, "Good panfish and bass, but locals avoid the deep water in winter. Ice can be thin over the springs, and there's something about the bottom that catches bodies." 3 drownings in the last 20 years, and all 3 took days to recover. They get tangled in something down there. I closed my laptop and looked out at the lake. The shack was still there, light glowing faintly now that the sun was starting to set, and all around it, those holes, dozens of them, maybe 40 or 50 now that I looked more carefully, all arranged in expanding circles, like a target. That night, I heard the drilling again, 3 a.m., same as before. I lay in bed listening to that mechanical whine, the sound carrying clearly across the frozen lake. It went on for 20 minutes, stopping and starting in intervals. I got up and looked out the window. The shack was lit from within, that same orange glow. And moving across the ice, slowly circling the structure, was a dark shape. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the shape. It was a person, or at least person-shaped, tall, wearing dark clothing, moving in a strange gliding motion across the ice. They were pulling something. An ice auger, I realized. They'd stop at a specific point, drill a hole, then move to the next position. The pattern was deliberate. They were adding to the circles, expanding them outward, each hole precisely placed, measured somehow in the darkness. I watched for 15 minutes. The figure never looked toward shore, never paused or adjusted their pattern. Just that steady, methodical drilling. When they finished, they pulled the auger back toward the shack and disappeared inside. The light went out. I stood at the window for another hour, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Someone was living in that shack. Someone who fished at night, who drilled elaborate patterns in the ice, who never showed themselves during daylight, and they were using equipment that had belonged to Gerald Hopper, the man who drowned here. In the morning, I walked down to the lake again. The new holes were there, exactly where I'd seen them being drilled. The pattern now extended about 40 yards from the shack in all directions. Still circular, still precise. I counted them, 73 holes total. I walked around the perimeter of the pattern, trying to understand what I was seeing. The holes formed concentric rings, like ripples spreading out from a central point, but they weren't evenly spaced. Some rings were tight together, others farther apart. There was a logic to it that I couldn't quite grasp. I approached the shack again, moving carefully around the holes. "Hello? I know you're in there. I've seen you drilling at night. I'm not upset, but we need to talk." No response. I reached for the door and pulled it open before I could change my mind. The interior was empty. No person. No fishing equipment. No stove or heater or any source for the light I'd seen. Just bare plywood walls, a floor with several holes cut through it, revealing the black ice beneath, and a smell. Cold and wet and slightly rotten, like dead fish. I stepped inside, and the floor creaked under my weight. The holes in the floor were each about 8 inches across, identical to the ones outside. I counted 6 of them, arranged in a pattern I didn't understand. In the corner, partially hidden in shadow, was a pile of something. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. It was clothing. A heavy winter coat, insulated bibs, boots, gloves, all soaked and partially frozen, all arranged neatly, like someone had taken them off and folded them. I recognized the coat from the article I'd read. Gerald Hopper had been wearing one like it in the photo that accompanied the story. My hands started shaking. I backed out of the shack and stood on the ice, breathing hard. The clothes of a dead man, sitting in his ice fishing shack, almost a year after he'd drowned. Someone had put them there, or something. I ran back to the cabin, my boots slipping on the ice. I locked every door and window, then called the sheriff's department. A deputy answered, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. Trespasser, suspicious activity, possible disturbance of a deceased person's belongings. "We can send someone out tomorrow," the deputy said. "But Mr. Reed, people ice fish at night sometimes. It's not illegal, and the shack has been out there for almost a year. Probably local kids using it. The previous owner's clothes are inside. The clothes he was wearing when he died." A pause. "His body was recovered wearing clothes. I was part of that operation." "Then where did these come from?" "I don't know. But like I said, we'll send someone out tomorrow to take a look." I hung up, frustrated. Tomorrow felt like a long time away. That afternoon, I tried to work but couldn't focus. I kept looking out at the lake, at the shack, at those holes. As the sun set, I made dinner and tried to act normal, tried to convince myself this was all explainable. At 8 p.m., I saw the light come on in the shack. I grabbed my binoculars and watched. The orange glow was steady, warm, impossible. There was no heat source in there. I'd seen the interior. It was empty. At 3 a.m., the drilling started. I didn't get up this time. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, listening to that mechanical whine cutting through the silence. It went on for 30 minutes, longer than the previous nights. When it finally stopped, I heard something else, a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Rhythmic, wet, heavy, like something large being dragged across ice. I got up and looked out the window. The lake was dark except for the glow from the shack, and moving across the ice, being pulled from the shack toward the shore, was something massive. I couldn't make out details. It was just a dark mass, elongated, leaving a trail in the snow. The figure I'd seen before was pulling it, that same gliding motion, heading directly toward my cabin. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. I ran to the front door and checked the lock, then checked it again. I did the same with the back door, the windows, every point of entry. The sound stopped directly below the cabin. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Complete silence. I waited for 5 minutes, 10, 20. No movement, no sound. Finally, I worked up the courage to look out the front window. The lake was empty. No figure, no mass being dragged. Just pristine snow reflecting starlight. But there was a new pattern of holes. A line of them leading from the shack to the shore, stopping directly at the end of my dock. And from there, another line extending up the snowy bank toward the cabin, toward my front door. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, a kitchen knife in my lap, jumping at every creak of the cabin settling. When dawn finally came, I went outside to look at the holes. They formed a perfect line from the shack to the dock to the cabin foundation. 12 holes total, and each one had something at the bottom. I knelt beside the closest hole and looked down. There, frozen in the ice about 6 inches below the surface, was a hand. I scrambled backward, falling in the snow. I stared at the hole, my mind refusing to process what I'd seen. A hand, pale, waterlogged, fingers slightly curved, frozen in the ice beneath the hole. I forced myself to check the other holes in the line. Each one had something beneath it. A foot, a piece of clothing, something that might have been hair. and in the hole closest to my front door, pressed against the underside of the foundation, was a face, eyes open, mouth slack, skin bleached white from being underwater for almost a year. Gerald Hopper, still down there, still trapped beneath the ice. I ran for my car, threw my essentials in a bag, and started the engine. I was getting out of here, going back to Minneapolis, calling the sheriff from the road where I had cell service. But the car wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I tried again and again, flooding it. Nothing. I looked out at the lake. The shack's door was open now, even though I'd closed it after looking inside yesterday. And standing in the doorway was the figure, tall, still, wearing Gerald Hopper's coat. It raised one arm and pointed at me. Then it turned and pointed at the lake, then back at me. The gesture was clear. Come to the lake, come to the ice, come down. I locked the car doors and sat there shaking. After a few minutes, the figure retreated into the shack and closed the door. I went back into the cabin and called the sheriff's department from the landline. This time, I didn't try to sound calm. I explained about the body parts in the ice, about the figure, about everything. The deputy on the line listened without interrupting. "Stay inside," he said when I finished. "Lock your doors. We're sending someone out right now." "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe less. "Just stay inside and don't go near the lake." I hung up and barricaded myself in the cabin. I pushed furniture in front of the doors, closed all the curtains, and I waited. An hour passed, then 2. No deputies arrived. At the 3-hour mark, I tried calling again. The line was dead. Not busy, not ringing, just dead silence. I checked my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising this far north. But the landline should work, unless someone had cut the cable. I looked out the window. The sun was setting already, impossibly fast. Had I lost track of time? Had I been sitting here longer than I thought? The lake was getting dark, and the light in the shack was coming on again. I heard drilling, but this time it wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from beneath the cabin. The floorboards under my feet vibrated slightly. That mechanical whine, muffled but unmistakable, boring up through the foundation. I ran to the bedroom and heard it there too, and in the bathroom, and in the kitchen. All around the cabin, that drilling sound, like something was punching holes in the ground beneath me. Water started seeping up through the floorboards. Cold, black water, pooling around my feet. The cabin was sinking. No. Not sinking, being pulled down. The ground beneath wasn't ground at all anymore. It was ice. Thin ice. And something beneath was drilling it full of holes, weakening it, making it ready to collapse. I grabbed my coat and ran for the front door. I threw aside the furniture I'd barricaded it with and pulled it open. The figure was standing on the porch. Up close, I could see it clearly. Gerald Hopper's face, or what was left of it, waterlogged skin, filmed eyes, mouth hanging open, tongue swollen. He was soaked, dripping black water onto the porch. His coat was torn, his hands blue white, but he was moving, standing, looking at me with those dead eyes. "Help me," he said. His voice was wet, gurgling, like he was speaking underwater. "Help me get out. You're dead," I whispered. "I know." Water poured from his mouth as he spoke. "I've been dead for a year. Down there, at the bottom, tangled in something that won't let go. But I can reach the surface now. I've been drilling, making a path, and you're gonna help me finish. I'm not going down there. You don't have to." He gestured at the cabin. "The cabin's already going. I drilled all the way through. Your foundation is sitting on ice now. Thin ice. It's gonna fall through any minute, and you with it." As if to emphasize his words, I felt the floor tilt slightly. The cabin groaned. More water was coming up through the boards, spreading across the floor in a dark tide. "Unless you help me," Gerald continued. "You finish drilling the pattern, you complete the circles, and when you're done, when the pattern is finished, I can use it. I can pull myself up. I can come back." "Come back to what?" "You're dead." "I know," he screamed, and water exploded from his mouth, from his eyes, pouring down his face. "I've been dead for a year, trapped in the dark, caught on something that keeps pulling me deeper. Do you know what that's like? Do you know what it's like to drown every day for a year? Every single day, drowning again and again, never ending?" The cabin tilted more sharply. I heard cracking from beneath, the sound of ice giving way. I had maybe minutes before the whole structure collapsed into whatever was below. "What do I have to do?" Gerald smiled, revealing rows of small, sharp teeth that hadn't been human even before he died. "Finish drilling the pattern. One hole for every day I've been down there. 365. I've done 364. He pointed at the lake. "One more. Right in the center. Right over where I'm caught. And then the pattern will be complete, and I can climb up through it. And if I don't, then you come down with me, and you'll be the one trapped. And in a year, you'll be trying to convince someone else to finish a different pattern. It's the way it works. The lake always gets someone." The cabin groaned again. The floor was definitely tilting now, sliding toward the lake side. Water was up to my ankles. I looked past Gerald at the lake. I could see the shack from here, the light still burning, the circles of holes spreading out from it, 364 of them, arranged in that precise mathematical pattern I'd never understood. A pattern to pull something up from the deep, a ritual paid for in holes drilled through ice, one for each day of suffering. "Fine," I said. "I'll finish it." Gerald stepped aside, dripping. "Augur's in the shack. You'll know where to drill when you get there. The ice will tell you." I walked past him, off the porch, out onto the snow-covered yard. Behind me, I heard the cabin give a final groan, and then a massive crack. I turned and watched it tilt sideways, the foundation giving way, the whole structure sliding into a growing hole in the ground that was filling with black water. It sank completely in less than 30 seconds, disappearing beneath the ice and water and snow, like it had never been there at all. I turned back to the lake and started walking. Gerald was gone, but I could see his footprints in the snow, a dragging, gliding track leading back to the shack. I walked across the ice, careful to avoid the holes. Up close, the pattern was mesmerizing. Spirals within spirals, mathematical precision, each hole exactly placed. And at the center, the shack. I opened the door and went inside. The ice auger was there, sitting in the corner. It was old, gas-powered, heavy. I picked it up and carried it out onto the ice. The spot where I needed to drill was obvious. Right in the center of all the circles, there was a slight depression in the snow. I could feel something beneath, a pull, a draw, like gravity focusing to a point. I positioned the auger and pulled the starter cord. It caught on the first try, roaring to life. I pressed the blade against the ice and began to drill. The auger cut through, easily, boring down through the ice, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4, and then it broke through to the water below. Black water rushed up through the hole, overflowing onto the ice. It was ice cold, but somehow felt wrong, thicker than water should be, darker. I pulled the auger up and stepped back from the hole. 365. The pattern was complete. For a moment, nothing happened. The lake was silent. The water that had rushed up stopped flowing, settling into a black circle in the ice, and then something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a hand emerging from the hole. Gray-white, waterlogged, fingers wrapping around my boot. Another hand appeared, then arms pulling. Gerald was climbing up through the hole, hauling himself onto the ice. He emerged slowly, water streaming off him, that dead face tilted toward the sky. When he was fully out, he lay on the ice for a moment, chest heaving even though he wasn't breathing. Then he stood. "Thank you," he said. "I can go home now." He walked past me, leaving wet footprints on the ice, heading toward shore. I watched him go, too shocked to move or speak. Then I felt something brush against my other leg. I looked down and saw another hand coming out of the hole, different than Gerald's, smaller, with a wedding ring still on one finger. It grabbed my calf. Another hand appeared, then another. More arms, more hands, all reaching up through the hole, all grabbing at me, pulling. The lake didn't just catch Gerald, it had caught others. All the drowning victims over the years, all tangled in whatever was down there at the bottom, and I'd just opened a door for all of them. They pulled me down. I fought, screaming, kicking, but there were too many hands. The ice was slick, and I couldn't get traction. They dragged me to the edge of the hole, and I saw the water below, black and bottomless and full of faces looking up at me with hungry, empty eyes. I went under. The cold hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. I tried to swim up, but the hands were everywhere, pulling me deeper, down through the hole, down through the water, down toward the bottom where I could see something massive and pale moving in the darkness. Not a tangle of weeds or debris. Something alive. Something that had been catching people in this lake for decades, maybe longer, holding them in the deep, feeding on their fear, their slow realization that they were trapped and drowning and would drown forever. I felt it wrap around me. Not tentacles, not anything I could name, just pressure, like the water itself was becoming solid, forming a cocoon around my body, holding me in place. I tried to scream, but only water came in. I drowned. I died. And then I woke up, still underwater, still trapped, still drowning. That was 3 weeks ago, or 3 months, or 3 years. Time doesn't work right down here. Every day I drown. Every day I wake up and drown again. But I can see the surface. I can see the light filtering down through the ice. And I can see the shack sitting above me, waiting. I'm starting to understand the pattern, the mathematics of it. How many holes you need, where they have to be placed, what shape they have to form. It's a map, you see, a route up from the deep, a way to climb back to the surface. I've been drilling. At night, when my body remembers how to move, I can reach up through the ice and drill holes. Slowly, carefully, following the pattern. I'm up to 273 holes, just 92 more to go, and when I'm done, when the pattern is complete, I'll need someone to finish it for me. Someone to drill that last hole in the center, someone to open the door. Maybe you'll buy the cabin. The bank repossessed it after I disappeared. They'll list it cheap, same as they did for me. Such a good deal. Such a beautiful lake. And when you do, when you're standing in that cabin looking out at the frozen water, you'll see my ice fishing shack sitting out there. You'll see the light burning inside even though there's no one there. You'll hear drilling at 3 a.m. and eventually you'll walk out onto the ice to investigate. You'll open the door to the shack and find the auger waiting for you. By then, the pattern will be almost complete. Just one hole left, right in the center. All you have to do is drill it. Don't worry, it's easy. The ice will tell you where. You'll feel the pull. And when you finish, when that last hole breaks through, I'll finally be able to climb up. I can go home. And you'll understand soon enough. The lake always needs someone at the bottom. Someone to keep the pattern going. Someone to drill the holes and wait for the next person to complete it. It's the way it works. The lake always gets someone So if you ever buy a cabin on a remote lake, especially one that's priced suspiciously low, check the property history, find out what happened to the previous owners, and if there's an old ice fishing shack sitting out on the frozen water, abandoned and impossible, don't go near it. Don't open the door. And if you hear drilling at 3 a.m., pack your things and leave before you see the pattern. Because once you understand the pattern, once you see how the holes connect, how they spiral down toward the deep, you'll want to finish it. You won't be able to help yourself. The mathematics will pull at you, demanding completion, and you'll drill that last hole, and then someone else will take your place at the surface, and you'll take mine at the bottom, where I'm still waiting, still drilling, still drowning every day. 92 holes left. That's all. Just 92 more. I hope you buy the cabin soon. I've been down here so long, and I'm getting very, very good at drilling.